Chapter 1502, Who Am I? Time passed. Meng Hao wasn't standing in the exact center of the land mass, but he was certainly the center of all attention. Outside, beyond the battered remnants of the ninth shield layer, was an army of bizarre creatures that filled the starry sky from end to end. They all hovered there silently, looking down, but unwilling to set foot onto the land mass. The massive gap in the shield still existed. It hadn't closed up. However, despite the many hours which had passed, not a single individual had entered through it. The strange nature of the land mass ensured that the energy of the vast expanse was scant, and also made it so that the will of the vast expanse was weaker. Because of that, the creatures that made up the army weren't as easy to influence as before. Although they still radiated a murderous aura, they were still mostly under the control of their primary instincts. As such, they were kept silent and unmoving by the realization that they would surely die if they entered the landmass. If things kept going like this, Meng Hao would essentially have won the battle. By now, he could sense that the mirror was very close and would appear in front of him very soon. It's almost here, the copper mirror. Parrot, return to me. Meng Hao took a deep breath. Within the 30-meter shielded area behind him, the 8 copper mirror shards radiated brilliant light. The pillar of light which rose up from them was like a torch on a dark light, almost blinding as it continued to summon the copper mirror. Enough time had passed for an incense stick to burn, and Meng Hao began to pant as he looked off into the distance. As for all the creatures in the army, they could sense a pressure building from off in the distance, something which left them feeling very uneasy, even jittery. They could almost make out a beam of light shooting, not through the starry sky, but through some other swath of darkness. However, it was in this very moment that all of a sudden, ripples exploded out directly in front of Meng Hao. The air in front of him had been still and unmoving before, but now a finger appeared. Its appearance was ordinary in all aspects, but as soon as it appeared, it caused the entire world and even the entire starry sky to begin to shake. It superseded all light, and in the darkness of the starry sky, only it seemed to shine brightly. It seemed to be moving in slow motion as it reached out towards Meng Hao's chest. Unexpectedly, he was completely unable to dodge it. A boom rang out, heaven shook and earth trembled. Cracking sounds could be heard from the land mass as fissures snaked out in all directions. Even the ninth shield layer shattered. Blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth, and he tumbled backward, slamming into the surface of the 10th shield layer. The shield distorted, and almost instantly shattered into pieces. Meng Hao continued to tumble backward nearly 25 meters before grinding to a halt. Coughing up another mouthful of blood, he slowly looked up at the rippling area up ahead of him. Now it wasn't just a finger that was visible. A gaunt figure appeared out of thin air, and as soon as his foot touched the surface of the land mass, everything began to vibrate. At the same time, a supreme and paramount aura exploded out from him. It was as if he were the representative of the entire starry sky, as if a single word from him could be considered natural law in the entire vast expanse. Apparently, a glance from him could determine the life or death of any of the beings which existed in the starry sky. "I'm the emissary of all heaven," he said coolly. The echo of his voice caused the entire land mass to crumble into nothing. The only exception was the 30-meter area upon which Meng Hao stood. All other locations collapsed into dust from the single word uttered by this emissary of all heaven. The surrounding swarms of creatures felt an indescribable reverence rising up from their souls. They bowed their heads and dropped to their knees to kowtow. "Greetings, emissary." The gaunt man seemed middle-aged, but had an ashen face and deeply profound eyes. He stood there, clad in a black robe, looking coldly at Meng Hao. "Why haven't you knelt yet?" he asked. It was one sentence with only 5 words, but as soon as it left his mouth, a pressure burst out that defied description. It slammed into Meng Hao, causing intense rumbling sounds to echo out. Meng Hao's cultivation base was at the peak of the 9 essences level, but it almost seemed impossible to bear the pressure. His knees shook as the pressure became like 2 hands pushing down onto his shoulders, as if he were being forced to kneel. But then Meng Hao smiled. It was a vicious smile, complete with glowing red eyes. Shocking power erupted out, staining the surrounding starry sky with redness. The redness might not be able to compare with the blackness of the starry sky as a whole, but in this particular area, it was like a tempest that couldn't be resisted. "I, Meng Hao, have never kowtowed to the heavens nor bowed to the earth. What makes you think that I would kneel to scum like you?" The redness in his eyes intensified, and his aura began to flicker with multifarious variations. Demonic chi erupted, and not only did he not kneel, he began to walk forward, one step at a time. His energy began to rise up, and the redness raged like flames. Instantly, intense pressure began to crush down onto the emissary of all heaven. The man's face flickered. "You really want to die," he said, snorting coldly. He lifted his right hand, and killing intent exploded out as he shoved his palm toward Meng Hao. Intense pressure erupted that exceeded the 9 essences level. If Meng Hao hadn't been on guard already, he would have been killed in body and mind. And yet he didn't stop moving for even a moment. In fact, he sped up. At the same time, his energy continued to build up, demonic chi surged, and the red glow expanded. Then he clenched his right fist and unleashed the devil-butchering fist. As the fist bore down on the emissary of all heaven, the red glow in the area rumbled, making it seem like there were infinite fists about to slam into the man. Then Meng Hao transformed into black rock form, only to change again into an azure-colored rock, which instantly changed color yet again to crimson. Then he shot like lightning toward the emissary of all heaven, slashing at him with razor-sharp claws. Next were countless mountains which caused heaven to shake and the earth to tremble as they descended. However, Meng Hao didn't stop at that. He unleashed the blood demon grand magic and followed up with demonic chi formed into the shape of a gigantic head, which viciously snapped its mouth at the emissary. Booms rang out, filling the starry sky. In just a few short moments, Meng Hao unleashed his most deadly attacks and then ended them all with the combined 8 hexes. The emissary fell back repeatedly, face growing increasingly pale. Finally, killing intent flickered in his eyes as he took to flight, not to attack Meng Hao, but to try to destroy the spell formation. However, Meng Hao quickly intercepted him. Instead of falling back again, the emissary of all heaven unleashed another attack. When it slammed into Meng Hao, he coughed up a mouthful of blood and tumbled backward several hundred meters. The emissary then stepped forward, appearing directly in front of the 8 copper mirror shards. Then, he lifted up his right hand and shoved it violently forward. And yet Meng Hao simply smiled. Eyes shining with madness, he waved his finger toward the emissary. As he did, a beam of light shot toward the land mass through the starry sky, moving at indescribable speed. It slashed through the hosts of creatures, destroying many of their number who could not evade, transforming them into nothing more than ash. In the blink of an eye, an entire section of creatures was destroyed. The emissary's face fell as the beam of light closed in on him, then stabbed through his chest on its way to the spell formation. Finally, the light faded away to reveal what had been inside, an ancient and primitive copper mirror. As soon as the mirror appeared, the 8 shards melted together, then flowed into the body of the mirror itself to form a complete mirror. A primordial aura erupted out from the mirror, shaking the starry sky and sending boundless ripples out in all directions. The emissary's face fell and he backed up. As for Meng Hao, he looked excitedly at the mirror. "Return to me," he said. The mirror vibrated and a blurry figure appeared within the mirror, a parrot. It looked out coldly at Meng Hao, seemingly confused. It was as if it were looking at a stranger, and at the same time, that stranger seemed familiar. After a moment, though, that feeling of familiarity faded. The parrot looked away from Meng Hao, and then turned and shot out into the starry sky, taking the mirror with it. Meng Hao's face paled, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood. Seeing the parrot flying away filled his heart with pain, especially when he knew exactly why it had seemed so confused. "Well, it is what it is. At least you're complete. Even though you're leaving, severing your destiny with me, I just hope that you can find a master better than me." The emissary of all heaven began to laugh uproariously. Although a huge hole had been pierced into his chest, no blood flowed out. He turned to look at Meng Hao, laughing the entire time. "That mirror doesn't belong to you anymore. It erased its own mind. You spent almost 1,000 years getting ready to summon it to you, and it was all a complete waste." Somehow, this emissary of all heaven knew about everything Meng Hao had been doing. "Now, since you feel like leaving the vast expanse, I'll help you. I will help you follow the destiny which has long since been prepared for you." Laughing, the emissary of all heaven flickered into motion, performing an incantation gesture with both hands as he shot toward Meng Hao. Then he waved his finger, and the entire starry sky of the vast expanse seemed to sink down, as if he were drawing upon some of its power, then merging it into his finger to attack Meng Hao. Meng Hao defended with all of his might. Booms rang out and blood sprayed out of his mouth. He seemed to be on the verge of being destroyed, forced into successive retreats. But then, the eyes of the parrot in the distant copper mirror suddenly flickered. It still seemed confused, and yet a tremor ran through it. For some unknown reason, it suddenly had the feeling that if it left right now, it would regret that decision for the rest of its life. Who am I? Who am I? The parrot shivered, and then the confusion faded from its eyes. Instead, it seemed to be struggling with itself, as though there were memories inside of it trying to awaken. Chapter 1503, Transcendent Armor. Who is he? Why does he seem so familiar? I obviously don't know him. Why does it hurt so much to see him injured so? Why do I have this feeling that he's a very important part of my life? Why, and who am I? I'm the spirit automaton of the copper mirror. No, wait, I'm a parrot. Then who's Lord Fifth? Who is this Lord Fifth? The copper mirror began to tremble violently. Inside, the parrot howled, its eyes bloodshot as memories apparently bubbled up inside of it. It couldn't see the memories clearly, but for some reason, it knew that it couldn't abandon the person who had summoned it. It could tell that he was very important, and that he viewed the parrot as important too. The feeling rising up within the spirit automaton gradually left, it convinced that this person was the owner of the copper mirror. I can't go. How could I go? The parrot howled again, its eyes bright red and its mind in complete chaos. And yet it didn't hesitate for another moment. It turned, transforming into a flowing beam of light that shot through the heavens at incredible speed, leaving the starry sky flaming in its wake. This was also the starry sky of all heaven, and yet it couldn't slow the copper mirror down. Everything shook violently, and a roar of rage echoed out. Meng Hao was currently wiping the blood off his lips. His eyes glowed brightly as he performed an incantation gesture, causing his cultivation base to surge as he prepared to fight. The emissary of all heaven was laughing coldly, and his eyes radiated an awe-inspiring light. Just when he was about to unleash another attack, his face fell. He turned to look over his shoulder, and saw the copper mirror and parrot returning, slicing through the starry sky at top speed. The man's pupils constricted, and his mind began to reel. Meng Hao also saw what was happening, and his eyes gleamed with excitement. Then he threw his head back and laughed long and hard. "Copper mirror, return to me," he cried, his voice echoing out in all directions. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the parrot closed in. It flew toward him at top speed, and then slammed into his chest and began to merge into him. A tremor ran through Meng Hao as a familiar sensation spread out. At the same time, his laughter grew even brighter and clearer. The glow in his eyes grew warm, and that warmth was not directed at the emissary of all heaven, but at the copper mirror and the parrot. The emissary almost couldn't believe what was happening, and his heart began to pound in his chest. As for the spot where the copper mirror had slammed into Meng Hao's chest, no injury could be seen there at all, and it only took a moment for the copper mirror to vanish completely. Then, black strands began to spread out to cover Meng Hao's entire body. At the same time, a towering pressure exploded out from him. Meng Hao's heart was pounding. He could sense the existence of the parrot now, and although it viewed him as a stranger, there was still some of the old sensation that came from their past connection. He took a deep breath, and his eyes shone brightly as he laughed, floating up into the air and taking control of the copper mirror. As his hands spread out wide, the black strands continued to cover him, spreading out from his chest toward every other part of him. In the blink of an eye, black armor covered his chest, upon which could be seen primeval designs. It seemed to contain an aura of the most ancient type. At the same time, Meng Hao's energy began to rise up to explosive levels. The emissary of all heaven had been just about to advance toward him, but the tempest which sprang up instantly slowed him down. The armor continued to cover Meng Hao, spreading out to both of his arms. As the black strands merged together, wicked spikes spread out to cover his shoulders with pauldrons that resembled parrot heads. His energy exploded out in shocking fashion, causing all of the bizarre creatures in the huge army to tremble inwardly. By this point, the armor had completely covered his arms, forming overlapping layers of sharp black scales. Now that the armor had covered his torso, it began to rapidly flow down across his legs. A moment later, a huge vortex sprang up beneath his feet, every rotation of which threw the starry sky around it into chaos. The pressure pulsing off of Meng Hao grew more intense, making him the complete focus of everything in the starry sky. The emissary of all heaven was completely ashen-faced as he fell back into retreat. He was muttering, and if one listened closely, they might be able to make out the words he spoke. Transcendent battle armor. Many of the creatures in the army were coughing up blood, unable to stand up to the intense pressure, a pressure which surpassed the 9 essences level and was close to transcendence. Booms echoed out, each one far louder than thunder, so loud that even heavenly might seem as if it would be crushed by Meng Hao's energy. The final extension of the armor covered Meng Hao's head. A black mask covered his face and a black cape rippled out behind him. It was a grand sight with colors flashing and the wind blowing. An intense, ancient aura radiated out from Meng Hao. Then something appeared in Meng Hao's hand, which he remembered very distinctly. It was the battle weapon. The black battle weapon pulsed with a cold glow that seemed capable of reaving the starry sky and shaking the vast expanse itself. The instant the battle weapon appeared, a gleam of reminiscence appeared in Meng Hao's eyes. Looking down at it, he murmured, "So, old friend, we finally meet again." In the instant that his armor was complete, the aura Meng Hao radiated caused everything to shake. Ripples spread out with him at the center, a tempest which shattered the starry sky. The wind blasted into countless creatures in the surrounding area. All they could do was scream as they were transformed into ash. The look on the face of the emissary of all heaven was one of unprecedented seriousness as he continued to back up. In the blink of an eye, the entire area was wrapped up in the tempest. The vast expanse trembled and countless creatures in the army gasped. Deep in their souls, they began to tremble in fear. It was hard to say who did it first, but one by one, they began to flee in terrified madness. They knew that if they didn't escape from the intense pressure which was building up, they would be destroyed in body and mind. Even the 9 essences paragons had the same reaction. Within the entire world of this stretch of the starry sky, Meng Hao was the ultimate existence. At the same time, an illusory image suddenly appeared behind him. It was enormous, gigantic, something that seemed capable of shaking the stars. It was a huge parrot. The parrot's feathers weren't multicolored. They were black. It had a terrifying aura which made even the emissary of all heaven gasp in fear of Meng Hao. Without even thinking about it, he began to back up even faster. Still not quite at the full level of transcendence, Meng Hao thought as he sensed the energy exploding out of him. It was the most incredible level of power he had ever experienced in his entire life up to this point. Even though it's not transcendence, it still makes me the most powerful person under the transcendent level. He looked up, and the red glow of his eyes shone out through the black mask, making him look terrifying to the extreme. "Well, it makes sense since my 9th hex still isn't complete," he murmured. Then he took a step forward toward the fleeing emissary of all heaven. Before he could get very far at all, Meng Hao was right in front of him, whereupon he shoved out with his left hand. "Get the hell back to wherever you came from," he roared. The emissary of all heaven felt himself vibrating, and then he exploded. A roar of anger echoed out, and madness filled his eyes as the energy of the vast expanse quickly formed his body back together. Meng Hao's expression was icy cold as he hefted the battle weapon in his right hand, and then slashed it through the void. The starry sky was split apart. The energy of the vast expanse which existed in the starry sky of all heaven was riven down to its very source. The starry sky trembled and cracking sounds echoed out. Shockingly, a rift spread out, forming a huge circle like a sealing mark. The energy of the vast expanse was not capable of entering within that area, resulting in the emissary of all heaven being cut off from his power source. "To kill you would be as easy as flipping over my hand," Meng Hao said coolly. He began to walk forward, and each step caused massive rumbling to echo out. After he had taken 3 steps, the emissary of all heaven roared, drawing upon the energy of the vast expanse inside of his body to materialize a trident with vicious, spiraled prongs. Meng Hao's expression was calm as he then shoved out with his left hand. The trident lurched to a standstill, then began to tremble. Meng Hao's hand gradually formed into a fist, and the trident began to twist and distort. Then, a bang rang out as Meng Hao clenched his fist tight. The trident exploded. Black mist began to roll out from the emissary. Clearly, he was deeply weakened. For the first time, a look of fear could be seen on his face. "So you can feel fear, huh?" Meng Hao said calmly. He took a 4th step forward, appearing yet again in front of the emissary. The emissary let out a miserable shriek and tried again to flee. And yet, no matter what he did or how he fled, Meng Hao would appear in front of him. "The reason I sealed this place down is because I'm very curious about what exactly you are." Meng Hao's left hand shot out as he grabbed the emissary of all heaven by the neck. "O will of all heaven," squeaked the emissary, "O Lord of all heaven, save me." In that very moment, though, Meng Hao suddenly began a soul search. He began to soul search the emissary of all heaven, who represented the starry sky of all heaven. Chapter 1504, Song Dayazi. As the soul-searching began, Meng Hao's mind filled with rumbling sounds. Shockingly, there were no memories to be seen. There was only a voice. Henceforth, you are the emissary of all heaven. There was only that eternal voice echoing out within his mind. It was impossible to say when those words had been spoken, but they left Meng Hao's consciousness reeling as strongly as if he had been struck by a huge blow. Even more astonishing was that the voice seemed to contain piercing power that reached out into Meng Hao. In the blink of an eye, the voice was echoing out in his own mind. It was like a sealing mark, burning deep into his body, resulting in Meng Hao being made the new emissary of all heaven. His body trembled, and beneath his mask, his eyes shone with radiant crimson light. Demonic qi erupted out within him, surging to suppress the voice which echoed in his mind. The scene out in the starry sky was of Meng Hao grasping the emissary of all heaven by the throat. It didn't appear as if anything strange at all was happening. However, the truth was that Meng Hao was facing incredible danger that threatened even his soul. It wasn't that he hadn't been aware that performing a soul search might be dangerous. As far as he was concerned, he had had no choice. This person claimed to be the emissary of all heaven, and even had some of the will of the starry sky upon him. Because of all of that, and because of the things Meng Hao had learned in the necropolis of the vast expanse school, he was able to form some speculations. The starry sky of all heaven, the starry sky of the vast expanse, had a will, and that will was none other than all heavens. As the saying went, all heaven fears the immortal. Furthermore, all heaven wanted the demon to appear. All of that caused Meng Hao to be filled with a sensation of imminent crisis, and also caused him to reach certain conclusions about why the mountain and sea realm had been struck with such calamity. Although he had no definite answers, he had a lot of clues, and therefore, this emissary of all heaven could be considered one of his greatest acquisitions. If he could squeeze some answers out of this man's mind, it would help him to understand the truth much more clearly. That would also give him a much greater chance at achieving victory in the future. You want me to become the emissary of all heaven? You don't qualify. Meng Hao let out a powerful roar, and his armor began to vibrate. The power of the copper mirror exploded out, combining with Meng Hao's demonic qi to form a tempest which blasted out in all directions. It drove the sealing mark away, completely destroying it, wiping it out of existence. It didn't matter how powerful that sealing mark had been in the past. After coming out from within the body of the emissary, it was significantly weakened. Add in the fact that Meng Hao was at his peak state, and once he fought back, he was able to destroy the sealing mark and dispel the voice. As the voice faded away, the emissary of all heaven trembled and his eyes began to shine. All of the hair on his head turned white, and his skin began to wither up. In the briefest of instants, he aged into an ancient form. At the same time, his mind was cleared of the sealing mark, and countless memories flooded back in. Because he was still in the midst of a soul search, Meng Hao could see all of those memories. He saw a world that was not the mountain and sea realm, not the immortal god realm, and not the devil realm. It was not the world he had seen in the necropolis. It was a strange land, and yet it was obviously located within the starry sky of all heaven. It was a flourishing world, and although it hadn't reached a level of ultimate power, there were still many powerful experts. Most importantly, the world had legends of the immortal. Apparently, it was a place like the mountain and sea realm or planet vast expanse, a place where the cultivators had immortal threads which, if they had the right destiny, could form an immortal root. In other words, it was a world in which the immortal could appear. In this case, the word immortal didn't refer to the immortal realm but rather what all heaven feared, the immortal. Meng Hao saw the emissary of all heaven in that world, except he was a young man. Meng Hao watched him practice cultivation and grow into a man. He started out as a rogue cultivator, who eventually exceeded all of his contemporaries. He unified the world in which he lived, reaching the absolute peak 9 essences. At that time, this emissary of all heaven was not like he was now. He was focused on his goals and was the center of all attention. Then, one day, outsiders appeared from beyond. A huge war ensued and the world was destroyed. All living beings died. The man who would become the emissary of all heaven threw his head back and let out a bitter howl. Even as he was being surrounded by his enemies, he suddenly erupted with demonic qi. He was forced to transform from the immortal into the demon, after which he used demonic qi to slaughter his enemies. He fled up into the heavens and came to be focused on one thing and one thing only: revenge. Revenge, revenge, revenge. That one thought was so intense that even in the midst of a soul search, it left Meng Hao panting, shaken. All of a sudden, he was struck by how the life of this emissary of all heaven was so similar to his own. As he continued the soul search, the emissary trembled. His eyes no longer appeared to be filled with confusion. It was as if he were awakening after countless years of sleep. He looked at Meng Hao, his eyes bright and clear. Not only did he do nothing to resist the soul search, he took the initiative to cooperate with it. He opened up his memories, allowing Meng Hao to see everything. As he did, his eyes flickered with reminiscence. Within the depths of his memories was an unyielding heart. There was regret, and there was a towering desire for revenge. But even more than all of that, there was bitter laughter. It was a noiseless laughter that accompanied his white hairs as they fell out of his head and floated down. His body was withering up and turning into ash. It was as if his body had been fixed at a certain point in time, and then time forgot him. But now, all of the power of those years was being inflicted relentlessly upon him. Meng Hao was shaken as he watched the memories of the emissary of all heaven. After escaping into the heavens with only his desire for revenge, the future emissary experienced many dangers and also acquired much good fortune. His cultivation base became powerful, far more powerful than before. In fact, he even stepped halfway into transcendence. It was a terrifying level of power that even far surpassed Meng Hao's current level as the most powerful person under transcendence. What was referred to as being half a step into transcendence came from the fact that there were three separate areas which could transcend. Those areas were the soul, the essence, and the body. Anyone who transcended in even one of those areas would be referred to as being half a step into transcendence. The future emissary of all heaven had transcended in body, reaching the same level as 9 seals from the mountain and sea realm. After reaching that level, he came to understand that the reason his home had been obliterated was because of the all-heaven starry sky, and the will named all heaven. The reason his home had been obliterated was because all heaven didn't wish for the immortal to appear. Instead, he wanted the demon to come. The man who would become the emissary paid a huge price to discover a weakness in the starry sky of all heaven. Astonishingly, he managed to fight his way outside, to reach outside the vast expanse. That was where the memories suddenly screeched to a halt. Whatever it was that he had encountered outside the vast expanse, it was impossible to determine. The memories were gone. The only thing that was clear was that a certain number of years later he reappeared, except not as himself. By then he had become the emissary of all heaven. Meng Hao was shaking as he loosened his grip. His face flickered and he backed up, breathing heavily. Mixed emotions could be seen on his face as he looked at the emissary of all heaven. The man's body was almost completely dissipated. He no longer seemed evil, but instead weak and bitter. He had lived his life for revenge, but in the end, not only did he fail, he also ended up becoming the emissary for the person he wished to exact vengeance upon. Meng Hao stood there silently. The emissary looked down at his vanishing body, and then back up at Meng Hao. "I can sense that you are just like me," he said, his voice hoarse and ancient. "Back then I was defeated, but I hope that you can succeed." He sighed and looked out into the starry sky, into the vast expanse. Then a vicious gleam appeared. "I wasn't always the emissary of all heaven. I am Song Daezi from the Seven Soils realm. All heaven, you are doomed to demise." Song Daezi threw his head back and laughed uproariously. It was a laughter that seemed to contain weeping. His body was slowly transforming into ash. As it did, his eyes flickered with memories, as if in this moment he was about to finally reunite with his clan members, his family, and his friends. However, before he vanished completely, his eyes suddenly gleamed with bright light, as if his soul had suddenly seized. He looked over at Meng Hao, an expression of disbelief on his face. He even looked anxious, as if there was something important he needed to tell Meng Hao, but didn't have the time. Even as he faded away completely into dust, he managed to speak a few sentences to Meng Hao. "I remember now, the weak spot in the vast expanse that I found all those years ago is right here. I remember now, I didn't find this place by accident, someone pointed it out to me. Wait, why can't I remember what that person looked like? I remember she was a woman. She was the one who told me about this place. Fellow Taoist, the will of all heaven is everywhere in this starry sky. Why did you pick this place?" With that, the man was no more. Meng Hao stared in shock at the space where the man had vanished. After seeing the look in his eyes and hearing his final words, Meng Hao's heart filled with intense coldness. The reason he had chosen this place to summon the copper mirror was not because someone had told him about it. During the process of searching for the copper mirror shards, he had stumbled across it himself, and could tell that the energy of the vast expanse was weak here. There was almost a sensation of expulsion and division. After hearing what the man had just said, Meng Hao's heart began to thump. He immediately backed up, rotating his cultivation base and performing an incantation gesture with his left hand. Then he waved his finger at the location where the land mass had once stood. After his finger fell, images rose up from the past, images that no one but Meng Hao would be able to see. He saw the battle between himself and the emissary. He saw himself surrounded by the bizarre creatures. But then all of that faded away, and Meng Hao was there preparing the defenses on the land mass. More time flowed backward, 20 years, 100, several hundred. The land mass was floating along in the starry sky, completely unchanging. Meng Hao frowned as he saw himself passing by the location and noticing it for the first time. More months passed. Then something extraordinary happened, a full 10 years before Meng Hao had discovered the location. This chapter was originally released in the form of a live reading by Deathblade and Etvaler, available below. Many thanks to Core Influx for recording it, and also to Guanzhong for helping me prepare it to include in this chapter. It's 1505, MP3. Meng Hao could see as clear as day that 10 years before he passed through this area, this land mass didn't even exist within the starry sky. It was completely empty. What he saw left Meng Hao reeling. Then he watched as that spot in the starry sky suddenly began to ripple and distort. A moment later, the land mass just appeared. It was almost as if a huge hand had dragged it out nowhere. His eyes flickered as Song Dayazi's words echoed in his mind. Without the slightest hesitation, he began to back up. However, it was at this point that a light sigh echoed out. "Fellow Taoist Meng, we meet again." At the same time, the ceiling mark Meng Hao had created around himself cracked and shattered into fragments. A will entered the area, crushing everything in its path. Then he saw a woman strolling toward him. She wore violet garments, including a skirt decorated with countless glowing stars and planets. She was beautiful, and her eyes seemed to flicker like the vast expanse itself. Meng Hao's eyes glittered as he said, "Han Bei." This woman was none other than Han Bei. However, this version of her seemed completely different than the person he had encountered recently on planet Vast Expanse. That version of Han Bei was enigmatic in certain ways, but was about as weak as an egg compared to him. Unfortunately, her soul was fused with Chu Yuyan's, ensuring that if she died, Chu Yuyan would also die, otherwise Meng Hao would have long since done something about her. But this Han Bei standing in front of him seemed, not like a cultivator but like the entire vast expanse. Although it was Han Bei standing there, it was as if she were radiating the will of the entire starry sky of all heaven, as if she were its avatar. The emissary of all heaven, Song Dayazi, had given him a similar feeling, although the will of all heaven upon him had been a far cry from this. As of this moment, Han Bei seemed like the embodiment of the will of all heaven. It made Meng Hao feel as if, within the starry sky of all heaven, all living beings would have no choice but to bow their heads to her. Everything would tremble in her presence, from land masses to planets to the countless vortexes which existed. Innumerable worlds and realms, countless living beings, would all have the same reaction. They would all acknowledge allegiance to this embodiment of the will of all heaven. Everything trembled as the chief flow of the entire starry sky transformed into something like a funnel, with Han Bei resting at its very center. The sight of it caused Meng Hao's pupils to constrict. Furthermore, he got the feeling that Han Bei hadn't only just appeared. She had most likely been there from the moment he began soul-searching Song Dayazi. Meng Hao's eyes shone with bright light as he looked at her. She returned his gaze, a slight smile on her face, a smile that seemed to be at harmony with the vast expanse, a smile that contained profound secrets. "Enough with the mind games," Meng Hao said, waving his hand and sending cultivation base power surging. The power of the copper mirror burst out and became shocking battle armor. Almost simultaneously, Meng Hao's energy surged as he slashed out with the battle weapon. The force of the attack ripped open the starry sky, causing rumbling sounds to echo out as the blow descended upon Han Bei. However, Han Bei did nothing to avoid the blow, and in fact continued to smile. "The fact that you realize something strange is going on here doesn't matter. I wasn't counting on being able to keep things secret for much longer anyway." She chuckled, allowing the battle weapon to slash into her. However, it was almost as if she didn't even exist. The power of the battle weapon passed right through her, sending boundless ripples out into the starry sky behind her. "That won't do you any good," she said, shaking her head. "This isn't my true form, just a projection. Furthermore, what has sent me here isn't the power of my cultivation base, but rather the almighty will of the starry sky of all heaven." Meng Hao's eyes widened, and he backed up, unleashing all the power he could muster to put distance between him and her. Hanbei shook her head again. Smiling, she said, "You can't escape. This is a special place which has been prepared by the almighty will of all heaven, to harvest you." With that, she extended her right hand and pointed at Meng Hao. His mind was instantly sent reeling. Unexpectedly, the starry sky around him began to spin, and no matter how he tried to flee, he ended up going to the same place. Smiling, Hanbei said, "The reason you found this land mass to begin with was because the will of all heaven wished it to be so. Therefore, he teleported it to a place he knew you would pass by. And that's because this is one of the few weak spots in the starry sky of all heaven. The land mass might be gone now, but the weak spot is still here, a part of the starry sky itself. It is only by means of this weak spot that you, someone who has yet to transcend, can step outside of the vast expanse. Meng Hao, didn't you want to see what it's really like out there? All you have to do is go out from this spot and you'll know." She slowly reached out and then waved her hand. The space behind her then began to distort. Then, it was as if every part of the starry sky of all heaven, as if the will of all heaven which existed in countless places and locations, opened an eye. Directly behind Hanbei, the starry sky converged into a single vertical line, which then slowly opened in shocking fashion to reveal an eye, pupil, and all. It was the eye of the starry sky, an eye formed from the will of all heaven. As the eye opened, rumbling sounds echoed out, and everything began to tremble. Then an indescribable power exploded out from Hanbei. That power caused everything in the area to collapse, revealing an enormous black hole. Apparently, that black hole had been ripped open by someone countless years ago. Now that it had revealed itself, the gravitational force it could exert was astonishing. Meng Hao trembled as that force grabbed onto him. He almost couldn't control his own body as he was dragged inexorably down toward the black hole. At the same time, a powerful force of expulsion rose up from the starry sky of all heaven, which shoved him toward the black hole. He trembled as he began falling faster and faster. He gritted his teeth and unleashed all the power of his cultivation base. He slashed back and forth with the battle weapon to try to slow down, but it did no good. He glared up at Hanbei, his eyes flickering with killing intent. As of this point, he understood that what he was looking at was not really Hanbei, it was the will of the starry sky of all heaven. "It was you," he said, his words bursting with murder and insane hatred. "The will of all heaven. You manipulated the immortal God continent and the devil realm continent into destroying the mountain and sea realm, all to control me and my life." His eyes were completely bloodshot, and even the red color of his pupils grew more intense. A tremor ran through Hanbei. Apparently, it was difficult for her to remain under the sustained control of the will of all heaven, and yet she forced herself to endure. Looking at Meng Hao, she smiled. "Let me ask you," she said, "how do you think the will of all heaven is connected to you?" Meng Hao's mind spun. He had come to realize long ago that the word all heaven had also existed in the mountain and sea realm. After all, the term all heaven clan contained those same characters. He had long since come to speculate that the two were connected, but to hear the words coming out of Hanbei's mouth right now caused his eyes to widen. "I am the daughter of all heaven, and you are the son of all heaven. Resistance is futile. In fact, you don't even qualify to resist. The will of all heaven has bolstered my consciousness, a state that I will not be able to endure again for the next 100 years. But that doesn't matter. I look forward to your return. When you appear again, you will have accepted your status as the son of all heaven. You will have forgotten your past, forgotten everything. Your world will no longer be that of the mountain and sea realm. There will only be all heaven. And you will become the new emissary of all heaven. Perhaps you will even become the most powerful emissary to ever exist. Perhaps you will become like me, a Tao protector to the grand will of all heaven." Hanbei's smile was as flirtatious as ever, but her body was clearly weakening. Rumbling sounds filled the starry sky as Meng Hao continued to try to use the battle weapon to slow himself down. However, with the power of expulsion pushing him and the gravitational force pulling at him relentlessly, he began to spin, trembling into the depths of the black hole. In the blink of an eye, he was swallowed up. The black hole transformed into a spinning vortex, which gradually began to fade away. Eventually, the starry sky returned to normal. At the same time, the power of expulsion from the vast expanse disappeared as if it had never existed. Light began to shine out from Hanbei, gradually turning her into glittering motes of fading splendor. She looked at the spot where Meng Hao had been sucked away, and continued to smile just like before. Her eyes even gleamed with anticipation. "Meng Hao, son of all heaven," she said softly, "you grew too quickly, so quickly that even the almighty will of all heaven was on guard. Therefore, even though the seed was not mature, it was still time for the harvest." With that, she completely transformed into light that vanished into the darkness. Soon, the starry sky was completely quiet and dark. Meanwhile, back on planet Vast Expanse in the first sect, Han Bei's true form was sitting cross-legged in meditation. Suddenly, her eyes snapped open and blood sprayed out of her mouth. She aged visibly and her face turned completely ashen. "For the next 100 years," she murmured, "I must not call the will of all heaven upon me." With that, she looked up into the starry sky. "I truly look forward to your return. Then you and I can create a new seed here on planet Vast Expanse." Chapter 15:05. You are the son of all heaven. Chapter 15:06. Cut off outside the vast expanse. In the same moment that Meng Hao was sucked into the black hole, his clone's ninth life, the eternally blind little treasure, was in the middle of sculpting. Suddenly, his hand shook, and he accidentally sliced his finger with the blade. Blood began to flow. He slowly raised his head, and a look of confusion could be seen on his face. A strange sensation flowed through him, as though a thread which had always been attached to him had suddenly been cut off. When that happened, Little Treasure felt as if he had lost something. As he sat there silently, a gasp could be heard from off to the side. His wife rushed over and immediately staunched the flow of blood. "What happened?" she asked. After a long moment, Little Treasure shook his head. "Nothing," he murmured. "I just suddenly got the sensation that I'm not complete." Because he couldn't see, there was no way for him to notice that his wife's face was as ashen as his own, and she looked just as confused. At the same time, the 9 essences paragons on planet Vast Expanse, including Jin Yunqian, the sect leader, immortal Bai Wuchen, and all the others, suddenly shivered. It was as if something had just flowed across them, simultaneously causing their memories of Meng Hao to suddenly grow a bit unclear. "What just happened?" "Something's wrong. My memories of the 9th paragon seem like they might disappear at any moment." The sect leader, Jin Yunqian, and all the others were all in their secluded meditation facilities, feeling completely shaken. Similar things occurred within the 9th sect itself. Far away in some other location in the starry sky of all heaven, beneath the new 33 heavens, many people in the mountain and sea butterfly had similar reactions. That was especially true of Su Qing. As she sat there cross-legged, she suddenly opened her eyes and coughed up some blood. She trembled as a wave of fear rose up inside of her, completely filling her. As of that moment, she could clearly tell that her ability to sense Meng Hao had been severed. Her face drained of blood and her eyes filled with grief. Smiling bitterly, she reached out to prop herself up on the nearby wall. After a long moment, her eyes filled with a resolute gleam. "It doesn't matter what happened or how much time goes by," she murmured. "I have faith that you won't perish." She repeated those words over and over, both with her mouth and in her heart. During that moment, everywhere in the starry sky of all heaven, any person who knew or had even seen Meng Hao, all felt a deep internal transformation. Suddenly, their relationships with Meng Hao seemed to change, to lessen. As soon as he left, all traces of him within the starry sky of all heaven were cut. If he didn't return within a relatively short time, then they would completely fade away. In the years to come, the people who had known him would return to the dust, and eventually, no one would remember him. //. Outside the vast expanse, Meng Hao opened his eyes. His armor was gone, having once again changed into the shape of a copper mirror which he held in his hand. When he looked out, he saw starlight shining down from a boundless starry sky. There was no mist, and there was no vast expanse. There was only the radiant starry sky, filled with one flourishing world after another. Meng Hao gaped in shock. It felt as if some unknown fetter had been removed from his cultivation base, allowing it to surge mightily. He could also sense that this starry sky was filled with immeasurable immortal power. In fact, when he looked around, the first thing he thought was that everything here was pure to the ultimate degree. It was completely different from the vast expanse. There was no dust, no aura of death. There was only flourishing life force. Everything pulsed with a feeling that made joy rise up in one's heart. "Why do I feel different here than in the vast expanse?" Even as he hesitated in confusion, he saw a few beams of light shooting toward him through the starry sky. They were led by a middle-aged man, next to whom flew a beautiful woman who looked very anxious. Once they could actually see Meng Hao, the woman shot into the lead position, her face filling with joy. She was the first to reach Meng Hao. "Elder brother, we finally found you." She seemed so happy that tears spilled down her cheeks as she threw herself into his arms. Meng Hao was confused, certain that he didn't even know who this person was. But then pain suddenly stabbed into his mind. "Elder brother, it's a good thing you and elder brother Chen Fan both had sealing marks placed on you by the sect back then. Otherwise, we might never have been able to find you." "Oh right, elder brother, what exactly happened in the arcane pocket realm?" The 100 sects all sent chosen into the legendary arcane pocket realm of the long-since destroyed vast expanse. But then, a few days ago, something happened, and many of the chosen suddenly died, and the others were forcibly teleported out. More people arrived by Meng Hao's side, and all of them seemed very concerned about him. They all started talking at the same time, causing Meng Hao's confusion to increase and his head to hurt more. A moment later, a memory rose up which told him that he was Meng Hao, a chosen disciple of the Blue Sea sect, one of the 100 sects that existed in this starry sky. Some time ago, he had joined a group of other various chosen to enter an arcane pocket realm. Supposedly, it was a realm that had been destroyed ages ago, a place known as the Vast Expanse Realm. There were certain restrictions that limited entry, therefore the 100 sects had amassed a large group of chosen to all enter at the same time. However, something unexpected had occurred within the Vast Expanse Realm, and the majority of the chosen had been killed. Of the group from the Blue Sea sect, only he and his elder brother Chen Fan had escaped. Apparently, it was because of elder brother Chen Fan that this group had been sent to rescue him. At first, all of the memories he was recalling seemed unfamiliar, but as soon as he heard the name Chen Fan, everything suddenly seemed to make sense. "Where's elder brother Chen Fan?" he asked. The person to answer the question was the middle-aged man, who looked at Meng Hao kindly as he said, "Your elder brother Chen Fan was already taken back to the sect. Hey do you remember everything that happened in the arcane pocket realm?" Meng Hao looked over at the man and somehow recalled that this was his master. In response to the man's words, Meng Hao thought back to everything which had occurred inside, and once again, stabs of pain racked his mind. Blue veins even popped out on his face. "Never mind," the man said, he sighed. "Just try not to think about it. Your elder brother Chen Fan experienced the same thing. In fact, so did all of the chosen who made it out alive." With that, he flicked his sleeve, leading Meng Hao and everyone else off into the distance. As they proceeded along, the woman continued to support Meng Hao. She seemed very concerned about him, so much so that she didn't mind if everyone saw them being so physically close to each other. At first, Meng Hao felt that it was somewhat inappropriate, but then his memories told him that this woman was his beloved Taoist partner and also the daughter of his master. They had been married for a long time and even had a son. No, something doesn't seem right. Meng Hao's head hurt more than ever, and his eyes flickered with confusion. After some time passed, the group reached the sect itself. The Blue Sea sect was located on a planet that Meng Hao found to be both familiar and unfamiliar. As soon as he arrived, numerous fellow sect members saw him, and expressions of delight appeared on their faces. They began to rush over, and soon a crowd had formed that escorted him back to his home. There, he saw a young boy about 7 or 8 years old who called him Daddy and rushed over to hug him. All of it seemed very unfamiliar, but then there was that name Chen Fan, which somehow made everything seem correct. No, this is definitely wrong. Something's not right. His head throbbed, and off to the side, his Taoist partner and his son looked at him with anxious expressions. He forced a smile onto his face, and after uttering some reassuring words, he sat down cross-legged. Frowning, he thought back to everything he remembered from his life. His father was an elder in the sect, and he himself had been born with extraordinary latent talent. After officially joining the sect, he instantly became a chosen. He progressed rapidly, and by this point his cultivation base was already at the peak ancient realm, just a step away from the full circle. His wife was the daughter of his master, and the two of them were childhood sweethearts. When they got married a few years ago, it led to widespread envy among their peers. No, that's not right, he thought, shaking his head. He subconsciously performed an incantation gesture and pushed down on his stomach. Eighth hex. Nothing happened. He looked down in surprise, unsure of exactly why he had said the words eighth hex. Next, he looked through his bag of holding. Everything inside seemed unfamiliar except for a copper mirror. What's this? He thought, surprised. Then he remembered that after awakening earlier he had been clutching this very mirror. Could it be something I picked up in the arcane pocket realm? He took out the copper mirror and studied it for a moment. The familiar feeling once again appeared, although it was somewhat different than before. This world seemed unfamiliar, and everyone in it seemed like strangers, and yet there was also something familiar to it as well. His memories seemed strange, but this copper mirror was different. Within all of the unfamiliarity, it seemed very familiar, as if it were something very important to him. "Just what exactly is going on?" he blurted. For some reason, he was starting to get agitated, so much so that his wife took his son out of the room and left him alone. After some time passed, his eyes were bloodshot. He reached up and struck his forehead with a glancing blow. In that exact moment, a knock could be heard on the door, and a worried voice spoke out. "Little junior brother, I'm coming in." The door opened, and a young man walked in who somehow radiated an ancient feeling. He looked at Meng Hao, mixed emotions on his face, as if he were thinking about the past. Meng Hao looked up and recognized the young man as though he existed, not just in his surface memories, but somewhere deep inside his mind. Elder brother Chen Fan. Chapter 1507, Can't Tell Clearly. The person who had come to visit him was none other than Chen Fan. The confusion in Meng Hao's eyes grew. There wasn't the least bit of unfamiliarity to this Chen Fan. Quite the opposite. Meng Hao was sure that he knew him. Not only did he exist in Meng Hao's memories, he also had a place deep within his intuition. As Chen Fan walked in and sat down cross-legged in front of him, Meng Hao felt stabbing pain in his head. Within his mind, Chen Fan was like a drop of water falling into a pot of boiling oil. The resulting explosion caused random, scattered memories to flit through Meng Hao's mind. They were like a cyclone that roared through his thoughts, none of them connected, and yet all of them featuring Chen Fan. They were like memories from another life, and they left Meng Hao trembling, his eyes bloodshot. Demonic chi roared, and finally, he clenched his hands into fists and roared, unleashing the power of his cultivation base. That power was definitely not the power of the ancient realm, it was the peak of the 9 essences level. Although the room was being destroyed around them, Chen Fan wasn't affected at all. He leaned forward, grabbed Meng Hao by the shoulders and shouted, "Little junior brother." Meng Hao began to pant, staring at Chen Fan, chaos raging within him. Not only was he bewildered by what was going on, he felt as if there were a voice inside of him yelling something at him, something he couldn't quite make out. As Meng Hao's cultivation base erupted out, the entire sect was shaken, and countless individuals flew over anxiously. "Little junior brother, wake up," Chen Fan roared. "None of that is real. Everything you experienced in the vast expanse realm was an illusion. You are back in the real world now. The vast expanse realm is just an arcane pocket realm, the ruins of a place which died ages and ages ago." Chen Fan's shouting grew louder, and it eventually pierced its way into Meng Hao's mind. Meng Hao was panting even harder than before, and his eyes were crimson. More and more memories were flying about in his mind. In one moment, he was experiencing familiar sensations in an unfamiliar world. The next moment, he was experiencing unfamiliar sensations in a familiar world. It made it impossible for him to tell clearly what was real. "Not real?" he asked hoarsely. He didn't recognize his own voice, as if it weren't even him speaking. It sounded hoarse and grating, like metal rubbing against rock. "Not real," Chen Fan replied. "It was all a fantasy we experienced in the vast expanse arcane pocket realm. You're not the only one to go through this. I had the same feelings. In fact, everyone who escaped from the arcane pocket realm had the same experience." He clasped Meng Hao by the shoulders and anxiously continued. "A big group from the 100 sects went into the arcane pocket realm together. Who would have ever guessed that as soon as we entered, we were sucked into a fantasy? Of course, there were upsides. For example, both you and I were able to find our own path of cultivation within the confusing fantasy." The bewilderment in Meng Hao's eyes grew more intense. He believed Chen Fan, but deep inside, there was something shouting at him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "I remember a woman," Meng Hao blurted subconsciously. "She." "Was her name Su Qing?" Chen Fan interrupted. Meng Hao's jaw dropped. As soon as the name Su Qing entered his mind, a tremor ran through him. The expression of struggle on his face grew more intense. It felt as if he were stuck in a nightmare. "Think carefully," Chen Fan said, "and you'll realize that the Su Qing you are thinking about is exactly the same as Su Qing from the Tao of Water sect, right? Junior brother, you were in a relationship with Su Qing from the Tao of Water sect, but in the end, she chose the path of immortality, not you." As Chen Fan spoke, memories rose up within Meng Hao's mind. He suddenly remembered that Su Qing had been a fellow disciple of the Blue Sea sect. However, because of various circumstances, she ended up defecting to another sect and severing any connection she had to him. No, Meng Hao murmured. There's also Fatty and Wang Yaokai. What about my dad and mom and my sister? What about Sun Hai and my master, Pill Demon? However, as more memories appeared in his mind, he had to admit that he saw images of everyone he had just mentioned. Virtually all of them were cultivators from the 100 sects, the same ones who had gone into the vast expanse arcane pocket realm. Was it really all just an illusion? Meng Hao murmured bitterly. Chen Fan nodded, mixed emotions flickering within his eyes. Little junior brother, he said softly, gripping Meng Hao's shoulders, you were stuck within the arcane pocket realm of the vast expanse realm for far longer than me. That's why you're so much more confused, and also why it will take you longer to fully awaken. I had the same suspicions as you when I first awoke. I had many confusing impulses, and felt as if I didn't want to awaken. I even tried to get back into the vast expanse arcane pocket realm. Other people might not understand what you're feeling right now, but your elder brother does. Chen Fan seemed very earnest as he looked at Meng Hao, and his expression was one of deep care. Meng Hao maintained his silence, and yet his eyes seemed more confused than ever. He didn't want to believe what he was being told, and yet everything around him seemed so real. He could see the images of the people around him within his memories. That was especially true of his wife, who had always cared about him even when he was infatuated with Su Qing. And then there was his son, his own flesh and blood. Via divine sense, he could tell that the blood pumping through the boy's veins was the same as his own. Most real of all was Chen Fan. But he muttered, the mountain and S before he could finish. Chen Fan interrupted him. Enough, he said, his grip on Meng Hao's shoulders tightening, tears welling up in his eyes. Little junior brother, you need to wake up. All of that was an illusion. I know that you were just about to bring up the mountain and sea realm. That's because the first place we all ended up in after going into the vast expanse arcane pocket realm was the ruins of the mountain and sea realm. Both of us got sucked into the same place. I remember the mountain and sea realm too, as well as the Reliance sect. Back then, I was your elder brother, right? Meng Hao took a deep breath and looked up at Chen Fan. It was an illusion, all of it, Chen Fan said. The mountain and sea realm wasn't destroyed in our time. That happened long, long ago. Many years in the past, the vast expanse realm really did exist, and inside of it, there was also a mountain and sea realm. But the people who lived there were not you and me. It was all a dream of mountains and seas. We were taken back into ancient times, and that had a big impact on all of us. Every word spoken by Chen Fan was like a bolt of lightning striking Meng Hao's mind. Stop thinking about it. It was all an illusion. What you see around you is reality. This is all real, Meng Hao murmured. Bitterly he closed his eyes. His head hurt, and every time he tried to think about the vast expanse, it felt like he was being stabbed to the bone. This is all real, Chen Fan replied earnestly. If anyone else had tried to convince him, Meng Hao wouldn't have believed them. But this was Chen Fan, and both in the clear memories and the vague ones, he remembered that his eldest brother always took care of him. Meng Hao smiled bitterly and then took a long breath. Elder brother, I understand. I sank into a dream of the vast expanse realm, and it was so realistic that now I'm having trouble telling the difference between what is real and what is not. Meng Hao's eyes were bloodshot, and he seemed older than before, exhausted. Just give me some peace and quiet and I'll be fine, he said quietly. Chen Fan looked at him, patted his shoulder, then rose to his feet. Get some rest and always remember that this place is real. You are not Meng Hao from the mountain and sea realm. You are the scion disciple of the Blue Sea sect from outside the vast expanse. Meng Hao, you are a chosen from the 100 sects of the vast expanse cosmos. Meng Hao nodded bitterly. However, there was something that no one could possibly know, which was that the copper mirror inside of his bag holding was sending a hot current of energy into Meng Hao. It swirled around inside of him as he closed his eyes, slowly calming him. The surrounding members of his sect finally breathed sighs of relief, although they still continued to look at him with caring concern. Chen Fan looked deeply at Meng Hao, then turned and left looking completely exhausted. After he was gone, Meng Hao's wife and son returned, looking very anxious and worried. The boy lingered off to the side, looking a bit scared, as though his father was a stranger. It's fine, Meng Hao said, opening his eyes. Don't worry. He forced a smile onto his face. A few days passed. During that time, numerous fellow disciples came to offer greetings. Most of them seemed to care for him, but there were also some who secretly wished that he had died in the vast expanse arcane pocket realm. Within Meng Hao's memories, he didn't recall seeing those people act in such a way, but now all it took was a look, and he could sense their true feelings. His master came, as did other senior members of the sect. All of them asked a few questions here and there and left him with some encouraging words. Chen Fan came to visit several times. Each time he would sit cross-legged in front of Meng Hao and chat, helping him to remember things from the Blue Sea sect and the vast expanse cosmos. Whenever they talked about the vast expanse arcane pocket realm, they would sigh. Meng Hao gradually came to accept his identity, although confusion continued to lurk deep within him. A month later, when everyone believed Meng Hao to have fully recovered, he was sitting there cross-legged on one rainy night, looking at his wife, when he suddenly stood and walked out into the rain. Deep in his eyes, confusion blossomed. Within the rain was a stiff wind, which lifted his hair up as it whistled through the trees of the courtyard. Is this place actually real, he thought. How come I just can't forget everything that happened in the vast expanse arcane pocket realm? There are so many faces I can't forget, and I can't stop thinking about the mountain and sea realm. He reached his hand out, and as the freezing rain fell onto his palm, it felt like he was being stabbed to the bone. Chapter 1508, Vast Expanse Society. After feeling the raindrops hit his hand for a while, his eyes shone with determination. I need to go back to the vast expanse arcane pocket realm and see for myself. If I don't, my heart will never be able to rest at ease. He didn't speak the words aloud to anyone. Instead, he spun, transforming into a beam of light that shot off into the distance. Back in their house, his wife had just opened her eyes and they shone with bitterness. She sighed. In recent days, she'd gotten the feeling that her husband was somewhat aloof, to the point where he almost didn't seem at all like her husband. Meanwhile, on a certain mountain in the Blue Sea sect, Chen Fan was also standing out in the rain. He seemed to be thinking about the past, and within his eyes flickered guilt and other emotions. Eventually, he caught sight of Meng Hao flying up into the air. He almost stepped forward to interfere, but then held back. It doesn't matter, he muttered to himself. Go search for the truth and maybe you'll find it. As he closed his eyes, a woman approached, who gently wrapped her arms around him from behind. Chen Fan's eyes turned warm. Slipping around to face her, he reached up and caressed her cheek. She smiled kindly, then looked off into the distance, seemingly worried. Your little junior brother. It's fine, Chen Fan said softly. Let him look for his answers. Perhaps he'll find what he's looking for. What about you? Did you find the answers? From what I can tell, it's going to take Meng Hao a lot longer to get back to normal than you did. According to the woman's memories, Chen Fan had recovered rather quickly, which was confusing to her. In sharp contrast, Meng Hao had already been back for a month, and yet was still lost in confusion. Chen Fan shook his head and pulled the woman up against his chest. He was inside for longer than me. Most importantly, I had you. As soon as I laid eyes on you, I had my answer. He held her tightly, almost as if he feared that he would lose her forever if he let go. The rain continued to fall even harder than before. Meng Hao was a bright beam of light that shot up into the heavens. Soon, he reached the border of the sky itself, beyond the clouds. There was no rain here. He kept flying, shooting out from within the sky of the planet, where he felt himself being restrained by a protective spell formation. He pulled a jade slip out of his bag of holding, and after the spell formation scanned it, it gradually released him. Without pausing for a moment, Meng Hao proceeded onward. Soon, he was out within the starry sky itself. Surrounding him was nothing but glittering starlight. There was none of the mist that filled the vast expanse arcane pocket realm. Everything was bright and clear, and the energy of heaven and earth was abundant. His eyes flickered as he checked his cultivation base. At the moment, he only had one sole lamp which remained lit. His cultivation base was at the peak of the ancient realm. After some thought, he became certain that the current level of his cultivation base was definitely different from what it had been in his vague memories. And yet, there were some things about it that seemed the same. However, there was no way to truly contemplate it. Over the past days, he had come to realize that if he tried to recollect certain things, it would cause splitting pain in his head and send his cultivation base into chaos. He sighed, and his eyes flickered with determination and focus. Following the information which existed in his clear memories, he headed in the direction of the vast expanse arcane pocket realm. I have to find some answers, he thought, flying along at top speed. A few months later, after passing through multiple teleportation portals, he was about halfway to his destination. The days of flying were draining his cultivation base, and yet he didn't consume any medicinal pills, nor did he perform any breathing exercises to absorb the energy of heaven and earth. At a certain point, after enough of his cultivation base was drained, a warm current suddenly began to flow through him, originating in his chest. That current restored his cultivation base almost instantly. Meng Hao was instantly enlivened and rubbed his bag of holding, a strange look gleaming in his eyes. During the months of travel, he produced the copper mirror on more than one occasion to study it. Although he never discovered anything in particular about it, he could sense the pulses of warmth coming out of it and flowing into his body. Although that energy seemed to vanish inside of him, he felt no sense of danger from it, and in fact, it made him feel happy. For some reason, he eventually took the copper mirror out and hung it around his neck where it could touch his skin, and allowed the current to flow out from it into his body. It was almost as if it were trying to awaken something. Because of that sensation, Meng Hao would occasionally slip into somewhat of a daze. His eyesight would swim, and after a moment everything would turn back to normal, and yet he continued to have the sensation that he was being yelled at, although he couldn't hear it clearly. Most importantly, because of that flow, he didn't have any need to absorb energy from the starry sky. It always ensured that his cultivation base remained in top condition. The result was that, from the moment he awakened in this starry sky, to the moment he returned to the blue sea sect, to his current situation of flying through the starry sky, he had never consumed any medicinal pills or absorbed any of the local energy of heaven and earth. Although he wasn't sure exactly why, he had the feeling that doing things that way was the best for him. He patted the copper mirror hanging over his chest and felt even more sure than ever that he needed to get back to the vast expanse arcane pocket realm. That was where he would get his answers. He continued ever onward. The vast expanse arcane pocket realm was actually quite a long ways away from the blue sea sect, seemingly at the border of the entire vast expanse cosmos. As he journeyed onward, he ran into quite a few cultivators, as well as numerous heavenly bodies. At the moment, he was nearing the Tao of Water sect. He was hoping to take advantage of their teleportation portal to get closer to the Vast Expanse Society. The Vast Expanse Society was where he would be able to make his last teleportation, getting him very close to the Vast Expanse Arcane Pocket Realm. The Vast Expanse Society, he murmured. That name sounds so familiar. His clear memories were telling him that the Vast Expanse Society was one of the 100 sects of the Vast Expanse cosmos, and in fact, was one of the top 3 most powerful sects in the entire organization. It was a mysterious sect, which was constantly locked down by swirling mists that prevented its disciples from leaving the sect. However, when other sects wished to use their teleportation portal, all that was required was enough immortal Jade, and they would have access. There were stories about the Vast Expanse Society in Meng Hao's memories. Supposedly, they had earned the disfavor of the exalted All-Heaven, who, in his wrath, had sealed their sect with mist, almost like a curse. The exalted All-Heaven. Meng Hao suddenly stopped in place and began to search through his memories for information about the exalted All-Heaven. All-Heaven was the guardian of the vast expanse cosmos, a supreme entity who had supposedly created the entire place to begin with. All sects offered wholehearted worship to statues of All-Heaven, and according to the legends, the very energy of heaven and earth that cultivators used in their cultivation was actually power from the exalted All-Heaven. Everything in existence, all living beings, were the people of All-Heaven. From generation to generation, for countless years, it had always been that way. Within the 100 sects of the vast expanse cosmos, being chosen was not the ultimate glory. Only by acquiring the title Son of All-Heaven could one truly be considered doted upon by the world. A person with that title was a chosen among chosen. There is only one Son of All-Heaven during a given period of time, Meng Hao thought. Sometimes one every 10,000 years, sometimes one every 1,000 years. To date, there have been 98 Sons of All-Heaven, cultivators who have been blessed by the exalted All-Heaven himself. It is only by cultivating the Tao of All-Heaven that one can be doted upon by the world, to be worshipped by all cultivators, to be respected by all sects. Meng Hao was panting. For some reason, after the memories became clear, he realized that he felt intensely opposed to the title Son of All-Heaven. Shaking his head, he cleared his thoughts and proceeded along his way. 10 days later, he saw a planet up ahead of him in the starry sky. It was blue, and it was just possible to determine that it was covered with water. It looked beautiful and seemed to be teeming with life force. The Tao of Water sect, Meng Hao murmured. As he neared, he couldn't stop his heart from pounding as he remembered that a woman named Su Qing lived here. In his vague memories, He remembered being married to someone in the mountain and sea realm who was just like her. At the moment, it was hard to get a grip on his thoughts, and also hard to tell whether or not he wished this place to be real or not. If it was real and he saw Su Qing, then Su Qing would be real. But if it wasn't real, then his heart would be filled with regret and bitterness. It was with such complicated thoughts and feelings that Meng Hao drew ever closer to the Tao of Water sect. Their teleportation portal was not accessible to just anyone. Only members of the 100 sects were allowed access. A stream of divine sense blocked Meng Hao's path, but when he pulled out his blue sea sect identification medallion, a disciple flew out and looked him over. Before he could say anything, the disciple asked, "You want to use the teleportation portal to go to the Vast Expanse Society, and then the Vast Expanse Arcane Pocket Realm. Am I right?" Meng Hao's eyes glittered, and he nodded. The disciple from the Tao of Water sect sighed. "I really don't know what the deal is with that Vast Expanse Arcane Pocket Realm. You're not the first person to pass through here, you know. Lots of people have been trying to get to the Vast Expanse Arcane Pocket Realm." The disciple led Meng Hao down onto the planet itself, to a location where a spell formation had been set up above the surface of the water. Meng Hao paid the tax, and as he waited for the spell formation to activate, he hesitated for a moment, then clasped hands to the disciple from the Tao of Water sect. "Fellow Taoist," he said, "may I ask, is Su Qing in the sect?" "Elder Sister Su." The disciple looked over at him. Realizing that there was something familiar about him, he studied him for a moment, then recognized him and laughed. "Ah, I thought you looked familiar. So it's fellow Taoist Meng from the Blue Sea sect." Apparently, he knew all about the things which had occurred between Meng Hao and Su Qing. "If you want to see Elder Sister Su, then you'll have to wait a bit. She usually comes to the teleportation portal around this time of day on her way to the East Sea to harvest Heaven Waiter pearls for her cultivation." Chapter 1509, Following the Crowd. Meng Hao clasped hands in thanks. After a moment, he decided not to step into the spell formation. Instead, he stood off to the side, waiting. After about an hour passed, the disciples in charge of operating the spell formation were about to completely lose patience, when a beam of light appeared in the sky off in the distance. "It's Elder Sister Su." Looks of awe and veneration appeared in the eyes of the nearby disciples, and they all clasped hands in greeting. Meng Hao looked up at the woman in the beam of light. She wore white garments, and although she wasn't spectacularly beautiful, was pretty and emanated an indescribable air. She seemed a bit cold, but wasn't the completely unapproachable type. Meng Hao looked at her, trembling. Suddenly she slowed to a stop and looked down at him. Their gazes met. Time seemed to stop. Su Qing hovered there quietly, and instead of proceeding along on her way, she floated down toward the teleportation portal. The disciples from the Tao of Water sect clasped hands respectfully as she landed in front of Meng Hao. She looked coldly at Meng Hao, and from her expression, it seemed as if she had no connection to him whatsoever other than being a former acquaintance. "Have you recovered?" Meng Hao asked suddenly. "I was confused for a few days," she replied coolly, "but I can already tell the difference between reality and illusion." After a moment, Meng Hao smiled and said, "Congratulations." With that, he turned and stepped onto the spell formation. It was at that point that Su Qing spoke again. "Have you been well recently?" He turned and looked back at her. "By recently, do you mean in the arcane pocket realm or in the vast expanse cosmos?" "You were inside the vast expanse arcane pocket realm for a long time. Everything there was nothing more than a dream. Meng Hao, stop living in the illusion. It's time to wake up. The reason I came down to speak to you is that I have some news. The will of the exalted All-Heaven will soon select the 99th generation son of All-Heaven. It will happen this year, and if you become the son of All-Heaven, then perhaps things can continue between us as they were meant to. However, considering the way you're acting now, I have the feeling that won't happen." She shook her head, gave him one last look, and then was gone. Meng Hao stood in the spell formation as it activated, watching her leave. He could sense her coldness and suddenly began to laugh. His laughter grew louder and louder as the spell formation rumbled, and then he vanished. When he reappeared in the starry sky, he was still laughing. He laughed and laughed until the laughter turned into coughing. A glint of madness could be seen in his yes. "Have I recovered? Chen Fan recovered. Su Qing recovered. Everything that happened in the vast expanse arcane pocket realm is just a dream. I don't believe it. Why do I have this pain in my heart? She's not Su Qing. She's not. She's not. She's not." Meng Hao threw his head back and laughed uproariously, his eyes glowing red. At the same time, the void around him distorted as countless invisible threads formed. They began to creep toward Meng Hao, as if to take advantage of his current state to bore into his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. But then, all of a sudden, the copper mirror hanging on his chest sent a flowing current through him that was far hotter than before. It filled him, causing him to shudder and then calm down. The threads which had surrounded him then shrank back and vanished. Meng Hao's mood gradually stabilized, and his eyes shone with a bright light. Something definitely felt wrong. His mood had changed too suddenly after encountering Su Qing, and now that he thought back, he realized that he had seemed out of control, as if something were attempting to influence him. He looked around, eyes narrowed, then flashed into motion, heading toward the vast expanse society. A few days later, he was in front of a huge planet, a planet that vastly exceeded the planets of the Tao of Water sect and the Blue Sea sect in size. It was covered with swirling mists, making it impossible to see its surface. However, there was a satellite planet next to the main planet, which was where the teleportation portal was located. Meng Hao looked at the planet that was the vast expanse society, and the stabbing pain in his mind caused him to shake his head. He headed to the satellite planet, then entered the teleportation portal and was gone. A few days later, he finally arrived. At his final destination, the vast expanse arcane pocket realm. It was an enormous vortex which spun endlessly, sending intense rumbling sounds echoing out in all directions. Countless asteroids floated about in the area, upon which numerous cultivators could be seen, all of whom were closely studying the vortex. Meng Hao looked at the vortex and his mind spun. He flew onward, toward the vortex, and quite a few people noticed him and looked over. He ignored them, keeping his eyes fixed on the vortex itself. Panting, he flew directly toward it, not pausing for even a moment. Soon he could hear people calling out, but he didn't pay them any heed. Then, even as he neared, he suddenly bounced off of an invisible barrier, a sealing power which prevented people from casually entering the vortex. A boom echoed out as Meng Hao was rebuffed. He coughed up a mouthful of blood as he was sent flying back. When he looked up at the barrier, the vague memories inside of him sent so much pain stabbing into his mind that his face paled. It was at this point that Meng Hao heard someone speak his name. Meng Hao. The owner of the voice seemed uncertain. Meng Hao turned and saw a fat fellow, expression quizzical. When their eyes met, he smiled wryly. "It really is you. I'm Li Fugui. Oh right, maybe you don't recognize me. We were good friends in the vast expanse arcane pocket realm." The fat man sighed and looked sympathetically at Meng Hao. "The fact that you've come here shows that you still haven't recovered. It was only recently that I myself was finally able to think clearly. I hope you can recover soon. Don't try to get back inside, by the way. We've all tried and it's useless. The exalted all heaven has sealed it up tight." Meng Hao looked at the man standing in front of him. Within his vague memories was another fatty who looked almost exactly the same as this one. "You've recovered too," Meng Hao said, smiling bitterly. "Yeah, not just me. Remember Chu Yuyan, Sun Hai, and Wang Yaokai? They've all recovered." Even as he spoke, he turned and waved his hand. A few beams of light appeared off in the distance, as familiar figures from his vague memories flew over. There were Wang Yaokai, Sun Hai, and Chu Yuyan. Sighing, the three of them looked at Meng Hao, as if they were also recalling everything which had occurred within the vast expanse arcane pocket realm. That was especially true of Chu Yuyan, whose expression was hard to read as she looked at Meng Hao. It almost seemed as if she couldn't believe what had happened inside, as if it were impossible that she would become infatuated with Meng Hao. "You know what?" Fatty said. "We're all chosen from the 100 sects, and I think that since we all became friends in a dream, we might as well do the same thing in the real world." He laughed. "All of you recovered already?" Meng Hao asked. Sun Hai nodded his head, as did everyone else. The sympathy in their eyes was clear. "We've all recovered," Sun Hai said. "Everyone did. You know, you should go spend some time with some of the others. After all, we all were connected by destiny within the dream." "Oh right, in the illusion Fang Yu was your sister," Sun Hai sighed. Meng Hao's mind was reeling. He looked around at all of the asteroids, at the dozens of people there, and every one of the faces was familiar. In fact, one of them belonged to his older sister Fang Yu. He saw his parents, his master pill demon, Taiyangzai, Lilinger, Fandonger, and Jixiang. Head pounding, he followed Fatty around to go meet everyone, all of these people who existed in his memories. When they laid eyes on him, they sighed and spoke emotionally of the things which had happened in the dream world. A few days later, Meng Hao had gone to talk to everyone. Finally, he sat down on an asteroid and stared blankly at the sealed vortex. Everyone here had already recovered. Meng Hao was the only one who was still confused. He suddenly felt very alone. The perplexity he was experiencing led him to question himself. If one person tried to convince him that what he had experienced was an illusory dream, he would never question himself. But it wasn't a single person. It was 2, 3, 10, 100. Countless people were all telling him the same thing, and as such, he couldn't help but question himself. "Don't tell me, it really was all a dream," he murmured. "Of course it was," Fatty said. He sat down next to Meng Hao on the asteroid. Taking a deep breath, he handed a flagon of alcohol over to Meng Hao. He held a flagon of his own from which he took a long swig. The vortex continued to spin. Although they were located somewhere far out in the starry sky, it didn't feel any different than if they were sitting on a planet. Meng Hao held the alcohol flagon in his hand. Instead of drinking, he sat there quietly for a while, and then began to chuckle bitterly. "Ah, well, I guess it doesn't matter," he said, shaking his head. At the moment, the copper mirror hanging at his chest was sending out so much heat it was burning his skin. And yet he didn't seem to notice. He raised the flagon up to take a drink. Because the flagon covered his eyes, he had no way to notice that everyone in the area, Fatty, Sun Hai, Wang Yaokai, Chu Yuyan, Li Linger, Fatty, and even his parents and Pill Demon, were all looking at him, watching, waiting for him to take a drink. And that was when something completely unexpected happened. Chapter 15:10, Strange Occurrences. Just when Meng Hao was about to place the flagon on his lips and take a drink, a beam of light appeared off in the distance, approaching with shocking speed. Its target was apparently not Meng Hao, but the vortex that made up the vast expanse arcane pocket realm. As soon as Meng Hao saw that beam of light, he shot to his feet. It was a middle-aged man with disheveled hair. Despite his appearance, he radiated an air of imposing dignity. He moved with incredible speed, almost instantly slamming into the barrier that protected the vast expanse arcane pocket realm. A boom rang out and everything shook. The man coughed up some blood. Eyes bloodshot, he threw his head back and laughed uproariously. "You've sealed the vast expanse so no one can enter. Blocked the way? Fine. I've been dead for ages, but I've always done things my own way. You think you can project my soul here and force me to deceive my foster son? I'm afraid that won't be happening." The man continued to laugh, then suddenly turned to look at Meng Hao. When Meng Hao saw who it was, his mind began to spin with shock. "Dad," he cried involuntarily. This middle-aged man was not his birth father Fang Ziyufeng, but rather his foster father, paragon of the ancient demon immortal sect in the Ninth Mountain and Sea, Qi Yunhai. They had met within True Spirit Knight's memory of ancient times, a place Meng Hao originally thought was all an illusion, but turned out to have affected the real world. Back then, Qi Yunhai knew that Meng Hao wasn't his son Jiusi, and yet loved him anyway. That was the first time in his life he had ever felt fatherly love. The memories exploded within Meng Hao's mind, becoming clearer by the moment. He trembled as his vision suddenly swam. Qi Yunhai looked over at him and smiled warmly. Laughing, he said, "Hey R, you need to see things clearly. Everything here is a sham. If I die, I can prove this place is definitely a trick. If I don't die, then it would equally prove that this is a trick to deceive you. Because I already died long ago." Qi Yunhai spun in place, and as Meng Hao looked on, trembling, he slammed his head into the barrier. He moved with incredible speed, drawing fully upon his own life energy. A huge boom echoed out. As he hit the barrier struck back with shocking power to stop him. In that moment he called out, "Hey, you are my foster son. Remember that the heavenly Tao has a flaw. There is nothing perfect in the world and nothing can be without blemish. All of this is in your heart." Everyone here said that I couldn't see things clearly. That was true, but I would still prefer to die to give you a chance to see the truth. Power slammed into Qi Yunhai, and he was instantly shredded into a mass of blood and gore that splashed out in all directions. He used his death to reveal the truth. He used his death to give Meng Hao a chance to pierce through the veil of lies. He used his death to prove that he was right. Meng Hao threw down the alcohol flagon. Power raged within him as he looked at the spot where Qi Yunhai had died in a haze of blood. The words he had spoken caused Meng Hao to tremble. His eyes turned red and his aura erupted. "Dad," he said, trembling, tears streaming down his face. Moments ago he had been ready to give in. That attitude instantly vanished. His doubts regarding the world he was in instantly grew stronger. He began to pant and shake, and as he stared at the blood mist and thought about Qi Yunhai, more tears flowed. His mind felt like it was about to explode from the countless strands of thought which were lurking hidden therein. It was as if those thoughts were about to flood out to fill every part of his being. Suddenly, light began to shine out from within him, and yet at the same time, a pressure appeared in the local starry sky. That pressure arrived without any warning and completely enveloped Meng Hao. It suppressed him, as well as the countless thoughts that seemed to be on the verge of forming. The power of awakening and the power of the pressure were using his body as a battleground. Blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth, and he staggered in place as his thoughts were crushed. He looked down, his face pale, at his chest, which now was racked with stabbing pain. The copper mirror was sending a flowing current into him, filling his body, causing him to pant. He looked up, eyes bright red. Numerous sighs could be heard, as everyone, including Fatty, looked on with complicated expressions. I never would have thought that Qi Yunhai would have the hardest time waking up, and not Meng Hao. Yeah, that's right. That's what happens when you don't recover, when you can't tell the difference between reality and fantasy. At this point, just about everyone began talking to Meng Hao. Meng Hao, did you see that? He went crazy. You can't let yourself stay confused. Everything in the vast expanse was an illusion, a dream. If you don't pull yourself together, you'll end up like that. Your mind will shatter. Meng Hao, wake up. Meng Hao, why can't you see things clearly? That guy, whoever he was stuck in the dream for too long and thus couldn't face up to reality. I know you, and I can tell that you were close to him somehow, but you can't let that affect you. Meng Hao, all the relationships and friendships from the dream weren't real. You have to wake up to reality. Meng Hao's mind felt as if it were spinning. The battle between the awakening memories and the suppressing pressure reached a boiling point, and finally he looked up and shouted, "Shut up." His words echoed out like thunder. Suddenly, the aura of the 9 essences level exploded out, filling the area. Meng Hao clutched his head in his hands, then roared. "Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!" He threw his head back and howled, creating a sonic attack that mixed with the power of the 9 essences level. Rumbling filled the area as the sound wave swept out, transforming countless asteroids into nothing but ash. Numerous figures, never having imagined that Meng Hao would unleash an explosive attack like this, were battered by the sound wave, shaking violently until they exploded. Fatty, Chu Yuyan, Li Linger, Fan Donger, Fang Yu, Sun Hai. One figure after another from Meng Hao's memories were eradicated. The instant they died, the air distorted, as if a roar of rage was rippling through the area, as if the source of that roar had been completely unaware that Meng Hao would do something like this. Everything in the area vanished. Meng Hao coughed up some more blood. Hair disheveled, he looked around at the void and the ash that was the remnants of the dead. Then he began to chuckle hoarsely, a laughter that rapidly turned more and more bitter. He looked over at the barrier which sealed off the vortex and began to fly toward it. My death will prove whether or not this is a trick. His head throbbed as his bitter laughter echoed out. In the blink of an eye, he had reached the barrier. Boom! Instantly, a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering power blasted back against him, sent him flying. His bones were crushed and his flesh was shredded. And yet he didn't die. He struggled to right himself and once again shot toward the barrier. It was at this point that an enraged roar echoed out. It was his master and Chen Fan, as well as numerous others from the Blue Sea sect. His wife was also there. Chen Fan grabbed Meng Hao, and his wife threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. "Meng Hao, have you gone crazy?" Chen Fan roared. The others from the Blue Sea sect came forward to restrain Meng Hao. He looked at them as well as at his wife and his master. Finally, he turned to Chen Fan. He wasn't sure what to say. He opened his mouth to speak, but then simply coughed up some blood and lost consciousness. When he woke up, he was back in the Blue Sea sect. His wife was standing protectively next to him, her eyes sunken with worry and anxiety. Meng Hao lay there quietly. His eyes seemed empty. People came to visit, but those empty eyes never changed. He didn't speak and, in fact, spent most of the day by the window looking out at heaven and earth. No one had any idea what he was thinking. He was the only one that was aware that the flow from the copper mirror was growing stronger. At first, it had pulsed out only once a month or so, but now it pulsed out many times. Furthermore, his view of the world constantly rippled, as if what he was looking at was about to be peeled away to reveal something beneath. The warm flow made its way through his body, but did nothing to heal any of his injuries, not that he cared about them to begin with. He simply stared out the window. The consequences for slaughtering Fatty and the others were already playing out. The other sects were furious and had joined forces to try to force the Blue Sea sect to hand over Meng Hao. The Blue Sea sect had refused to give in, and thus, a war began. The fighting escalated rapidly. Soon, the rumbling of battle could be heard on the Blue Sea sect's planet. Countless disciples died. Some of the allied sects had already managed to fight their way into the Blue Sea sect itself. The sound of explosions filled the world, but Meng Hao didn't care. Nor did he care about the looks cast upon him by his wife or the other fellow disciples. They were looks of concern, anxiety, reproach, and even hatred. Meng Hao didn't respond to such looks. Gradually, voices rang out within the sect itself, calling for Meng Hao to be handed over. However, his master, Chen Fan, and other fellow disciples vowed to die before doing such a thing. Meng Hao watched this happen silently. Inside, he could feel ripples of emotion when he saw what was happening, but he violently suppressed them. He wanted to see exactly how far things would go. Eventually, a month later, the allied sects broke through the main gate of the Blue Sea sect. Slaughter ensued. Meng Hao watched his wife sustain serious injuries protecting him. He watched a flying sword stab into his son's forehead. As the boy died, he cried out weakly for his father. Meng Hao ignored that, although he trembled with grief. "Enough, enough," he said, laughing bitterly. Chapter 15:11. I'm Meng Hao. The Blue Sea sect wasn't exterminated. Even as Meng Hao stood there silently, grief filling his eyes, his heart trembling, a will spread out that caused all the bitterly fighting cultivators to suddenly drop to their knees. It was the will of all heaven, which became a radiant, seven-colored light that filled the starry sky. It wasn't just in the location of the Blue Sea sect. It actually spread out to cover all of the 100 sects in the vast expanse cosmos. O ye people of mine! It was an ancient voice that filled the minds of all cultivators in the vast expanse cosmos and told them that from this moment on, slaughter was not permitted. The dispute was over, and that was because the identity of the 99th generation Son of all heaven was soon to be announced. The majestic will told all people and all sects that in a mere half-year, the trial by fire to win the title of Son of all heaven would begin, a grand battle royale. In the end, only one person would be named the 99th generation Son of all heaven. That person would receive the blessing of all heaven, and would represent all heaven to step into the vast expanse arcane pocket realm and accomplish a very special mission. The voice faded away, and the light became countless motes that rained down onto the 100 sects of the vast expanse cosmos. Any location with cultivators experienced that rain of light. They were all heaven seeds, and any cultivator who wished to participate in the trial by fire to become the Son of all heaven needed to absorb one of them in order to qualify. The disciples from the allied sects withdrew. None of them dared to countermand the orders of all heaven. Not a single one hesitated for even a moment. Thus the war ended. Silence replaced the bitterness in the Blue Sea sect. It was almost as if everyone forgot about the bloody, bitter battle which had just been raging. All of the remaining disciples and elders of the sect gathered together. With the exception of the very old, everyone was given an all-heaven seed. One of them was delivered to Meng Hao by Chen Fan. "Still confused, I see," Chen Fan said bitterly. "You don't care how many people died in your sect, do you? Even your own son. I thought you said none of this was real, and that only what you experienced in the vast expanse arcane pocket realm was real." Various emotions could be heard in his voice. "Well, absorb this seed. Once you become the Son of all heaven, you can go back into the vast expanse arcane pocket realm. Then you can see for yourself what is real and what is not." Chen Fan placed the all-heaven seed in front of Meng Hao, then stood there, waiting for Meng Hao to absorb it. Everyone else looked on with varied expressions. Some had hatred in their eyes, some seemed torn. All seemed to rue the war which had been sparked by Meng Hao. Meng Hao looked at the all-heaven seed and shivered. His wife was off in the distance, holding their dead son. She was giggling madly, seemingly in a daze. Meng Hao stood there silently. He picked up the seed and examined it. It wriggled. Just as Chen Fan had said, by absorbing this seed, Meng Hao could become the Son of all heaven. He could go back into the vast expanse arcane pocket realm. And yet, the current flowing into him from the copper mirror continued to grow hotter. It seemed to have reached a critical juncture, as if it were about to fuse with him. The indistinct voice he could hear was growing clearer by the moment. His vision swam, and he suddenly saw a different version of himself. He saw himself sitting there cross-legged in the Blue Sea sect. He saw himself absorb the seed and participate in the fight to become the Son of all heaven. He took first place and was named the Son of all heaven. That different version of himself offered formal greetings to all heaven. The will of all heaven filled his body, causing the seed to grow. It soon filled him through and through. after which he entered the vast expanse arcane pocket realm. As soon as he entered, he saw a beautiful woman. As soon as she caught sight of him, she smiled. Like I said, once you returned, you would be the son of all heaven. A tremor ran through Meng Hao. The dream suddenly ended, shattering to pieces. He opened his eyes and everything became clear. The seed was still laying there on his palm. Even as he looked at it, it began to melt, as if it were about to bore into his flesh. The heat from the copper mirror grew hotter than it ever had. It filled Meng Hao's body, whereupon a bronze lamp appeared. Apparently, it had always been there, somehow concealed from Meng Hao's perception. Now that it was visible, it began to shine brightly, sending out light that prevented anything from entering him. As the light filled him, the confusion in his eyes faded away. His mind filled with crackling sounds. He thought about Qi Yunhai, and he thought about how Fatty and all the others had died. He thought about how his son had been killed, along with so many other fellow sect members. But then those memories became somewhat indistinct. At the same time, it was as if a veil had been ripped from his mind. Memories of the starry sky of the vast expanse and the mountain and sea realm flooded into his mind. The voice which had been calling out to him so indistinctly was now as clear as crystal. That voice was his own, and it was speaking 4 simple words. "I am Meng Hao," he murmured. He looked at Chen Fan and his eyes clear, lacking any confusion whatsoever. Sighing, he rose to his feet. "Elder brother Chen Fan, I am no longer confused." He looked over at his wife, his gaze warm. Chen Fan seemed more torn than ever, as though he were sighing inwardly. Meng Hao's wife shivered in response to his words. Tears streaming down her face, she rushed over and embraced him. There, everything's fine," Meng Hao said softly. More tears flowed as she held him tightly, as if she feared that loosening her grip would cause him to leave forever. Meng Hao's eyes were bloodshot, but he seemed completely calm as he looked down at his wife. No one knew that, after his eyes opened just now, his view of the world became completely different. The sky was no longer clear, but rather was full of mist. The mountains were not lush and green, they were barren and empty. The beautifully decorated architecture of the sect was now nothing more than crumbled ruins. His wife was actually a desiccated corpse, as was virtually everyone else in the sect. What had once been flourishing spiritual energy was really the sinister aura of death and an aroma of decay. His son, the 8-year-old boy, was actually not a boy. He was a dwarf and also a desiccated corpse. His eye sockets didn't contain eyes, only writhing black maggots. In all of heaven and earth, there was only one other person besides Meng Hao who was different, Chen Fan. Meng Hao looked around at everything, then closed his eyes. His wife was smiling, seemingly elated that her husband had finally recovered. She was just about to say something when Meng Hao reached up and stroked her hair, his gaze warmer than ever. However, if you looked very closely, you would see a tiny flicker of pity in his eyes. "Little junior brother," Chen Fan said, looking more torn than ever, "you need to absorb that all-heaven seed as soon as possible." "I'll." "Elder brother Chen Fan," Meng Hao interrupted calmly, "even after some contemplation, I can't think of any time that I ever let you down. Not once. I've always respected you, and no matter what happened, you have always been my eldest brother." Meng Hao held his wife and looked over at Chen Fan. Chen Fan's heart thumped, and he was just about to say something else when Meng Hao's voice spoke out, seemingly filled with magical power. I cannot forget those things which you say are illusions. I cannot forget that which exists in my mind. If those real things are actually illusions, a mere dream, then I would rather sink into that dream than ever wake up." He felt his wife suddenly go stiff. His eyes filled with pity as he suddenly pushed his hand down hard onto her back. Under the shocked glances of all present, that simple movement severed his wife's aura and exterminated her soul. Meng Hao slowly rose to his feet. "It's better to release you," he said softly. "That way no one can control your corpse or soul after death." The surrounding crowds were as shocked as if they had been struck by lightning. After a moment of silence, enraged howls rose up, and their bloodshot eyes filled with shock and fear. The sect elders took to flight. The sect leader and even the Dao realm experts were flabbergasted. "Meng Hao!" Chen Fan roared in disbelief. At the same time, an anguished cry rose up from Meng Hao's master, who was also his father-in-law. He flew over, trembling, staring first at his daughter's corpse and then at Meng Hao. Coughing up a mouthful of blood, he began to laugh, and then lunged at Meng Hao. Meng Hao's eyes were calm. The world had completely transformed. As of this moment he was not being attacked by a middle-aged man but rather a corpse with a huge, empty hole in its chest. Meng Hao sighed and closed his eyes. Just when the man was almost upon him, Meng Hao opened his eyes again. Although they were still bloodshot, the pupils were now crimson. He clenched his right hand into a fist and punched out, shredding his master into a haze of blood and gore. That was the battle prowess of the peak 9 essences level, which exploded out from Meng Hao. Elder brother Meng is bedeviled. Kill him? Roars of fury and rage echoed out from the mouths of the elders. As they charged toward Meng Hao, his eyes flickered with pity and he moved forward. He became a blur, and every person he encountered, regardless of the level of their cultivation base, was destroyed in body and mind by the single flick of a finger. Soon all heaven and earth was sinking into darkness. Miserable shrieks rose up. Wherever Meng Hao went, death followed. Blood flowed across the ground and bodies could be seen everywhere. However, what Meng Hao saw was a bit different. The blood which flowed was not red, but rather black and filthy. Furthermore, the corpses which lay in his wake had been corpses long before he struck them down. Chapter 15:12. It all falls apart. Everything was quiet in the sect. Only Meng Hao and Chen Fan remained standing. Meng Hao, why you? Chen Fan was trembling in disbelief at everything which had just occurred. His eyes were filled with grief, rage, and conflict. Meng Hao looked around at the corpses and sighed. Then he looked at the all-heaven seed which was trying to force its way into his palm and crushed it. Chen Fan looked at Meng Hao, his expression torn. You exterminated your own sect, killed your own wife and master, all because of a world that's an illusion. Was all this worth it, Meng Hao? Meng Hao looked up at him. Chen Fan, I've always respected you as my elder brother. Enough with the act. You have your path that you must follow. I'm not sure why you did this, although I'm sure you have your reasons. I can't blame you. I have my own path too. Chen Fan stood there silently, bitterly. Finally, he smiled, a bitter, conflicted smile that gradually grew more resolute. He promised me that as long as you lost yourself in here, my Linger would truly be resurrected. To him, something like that is as easy as flipping over a hand. Meng Hao, I Chen Fan have done anything and everything to truly resurrect my Linger. After all the years which have passed, this was my only hope. Therefore, you have the right to blame me. You can even hate me. Meng Hao, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Now Meng Hao also looked torn. Various memories flitted through his mind as he looked at Chen Fan. He knew that the Linger Chen Fan referred to was none other than Shan Ling from the solitary sword sect. Meng Hao shook his head, ignoring Chen Fan as he contemplated the danger he had just been in. If it weren't for the copper mirror, for the enlightenment provided by the death of his foster father Qi Yunhai and his own unimaginable willpower, he would surely have lost himself in here and become exactly what Hanbei had described. He would have returned to her side as the son of all heaven. It was time to leave. He took a step forward and made a ripping gesture with his hand. Rumbling echoed out as a rift was torn open into the air in front of him, which he prepared to step through. Meng Hao, you can't leave, cried Chen Fan, tears streaming down his face. You have to stay. His eyes filled with determination, with obsessed focus. He lifted his hands up and the world shook. Apparently, a will was descending, a will which then flowed into Chen Fan himself. Chen Fan's energy skyrocketed and his cultivation base power soared. Blue veins bulged out on his face and he shook visibly. His eyes turned crimson and seemed to suddenly lack conscious thought. Only obsession remained. Suddenly, he turned into a blur that shot toward Meng Hao. He lifted his right hand, whereupon heaven and earth seemed to back him, and the starry sky seemed to exist within his hands. Apparently, the will of all heaven had taken over Chen Fan's body and was using him as its shell to act within the world. Rumbling echoed out and Meng Hao fell back. Blood oozed out of the corners of his mouth and his eyes shone with grief. The person in front of him was his elder brother, someone he had known all the way back in the Reliance sect. Back on planet South Heaven, he had almost been like a blood brother to him. But now, they had no option other than to fight. There could be no holding back or surrendering. Chen Fan could not retreat. He had gambled everything, all in the hopes of resurrecting his wife. Neither could Meng Hao retreat. If he was defeated, he would be lost in this place and would lose everything. This place was both real and false. The objects were real. What was false was that they existed, not in the present but the past. Meng Hao smiled bitterly. He slapped his chest with his palm, and the copper mirror flew out, transforming into innumerable black threads which spread out to cover his entire body in a suit of armor. The battle weapon appeared in his hand, and he transformed into a beam of light that shot toward Chen Fan. Incredible rumbling echoed out. Heaven and earth were shattered, and mountains were transformed into rubble. The sect became nothing more than ash as the two of them rose up into the starry sky as they battled. Chen Fan was fighting with the power of the will of all heaven, and the divine ability he unleashed was bizarre. Unexpectedly it was a memory magic. It was a deceptively unthreatening magic that targeted specific memories in Meng Hao's mind, causing all of the versions of Chen Fan, which existed there, to simultaneously attack him. It wasn't just the current Meng Hao that was being targeted. It was all of the different versions of him throughout history, including Planet South Heaven and the Reliance sect. When put into words, it is a difficult thing to describe, but the end result was that even as Chen Fan and Meng Hao fought in reality, countless stabs of pain filled Meng Hao's mind. He felt his memories diverging from reality, as if all of his memories of Chen Fan were rising up and exploding. This magical technique was no mere divine ability. It was a Tao which went far beyond any sort of natural or magical law. It was something the likes of which Meng Hao had never before experienced. However, he knew that the only way to vanquish Chen Fan was to defeat him in all of the past memories that existed in his mind. As they fought in reality, Meng Hao thought back to the time when the 33 heavens were about to descend upon the mountain and sea realm. Even as he prepared to defend the mountains and seas, Chen Fan suddenly attacked him. At the same time, back on planet South Heaven, Meng Hao was visiting Chen Fan and his sect. They were drinking in front of the rock that was Shanling, when suddenly, Chen Fan's eyes flickered with killing intent, and he slashed his sword out at Meng Hao. Simultaneously, he was back in the lands of South Heaven, shortly after leaving the Reliance sect. He had just arrived in the heart of the southern domain when he was reunited with Chen Fan. Chen Fan was delighted to see him, but then his face twisted viciously, and he attacked. They were back in the Reliance sect, when all of the other great sects came to try to seize the sublime spirit scripture. As the other disciples were taken away, Meng Hao stood alone on the mountaintop, watching bitterly as a middle-aged man from the solitary sword sect asked Chen Fan if he wanted to be taken as a disciple of his sect. Chen Fan was just about to respond when his eyes flickered. Without any warning, he suddenly turned and attacked Meng Hao. There was another moment in which Meng Hao and Chen Fan were sitting together in the Reliance sect. Chen Fan was introducing the sect to Meng Hao, when suddenly his eyes flashed with coldness, and he attacked. Back on the very day Meng Hao had joined the sect, he and Fatty were there together being escorted into the servants' district, when suddenly a blur appeared, shooting down from one of the mountain tops. That blur shot directly toward Meng Hao, intent on killing him. All of these things happened at the same time. Blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth as he watched himself be killed by Chen Fan over and over again, and simultaneously watched himself kill Chen Fan over and over again. The memories piled up onto one another, and at the same time, their real fight intensified. The memories of them fighting transformed into seeds, seeds which, by means of some unique fashion, were implanted into his mind. Meng Hao, Chen Fan cried, become the son of all heaven, become the emissary of all heaven, get rid of your pain, all of this has been foreordained. Then he roared, all heaven transformation. A boom could be heard as his muscles and blood evaporated. He was left as nothing more than skin and bones, and the resulting bloody mist was filled with the will of all heaven as it surged out to cover Meng Hao. At the same time, the seeds inside of Meng Hao exploded, likewise turning into a mist which disseminated the will of all heaven. The mist spread out, as if to infect Meng Hao inside and out with the will of all heaven, to force him to become both the son and emissary of all heaven. Just when Meng Hao was about to fight back, he realized that the power of his own bloodline was doing nothing to defend him. In fact, it was even possible to say that his blood was perfectly suited to be able to act as a host for the will of all heaven. It was even the same with the demonic chi inside of him. It was as if everything about him had been prepared specifically for the will of all heaven. If the will of all heaven had entered the body of any other person, the process would not have occurred so efficiently. It was as if this were the perfect possession, as if Meng Hao truly had been prepared specifically for the will of all heaven. In and out, whether it was the bloodline or the demonic chi, whether it was within his memories or without, the will of all heaven exploded, and Meng Hao seemed powerless to do anything about it. But then, the will of all heaven suddenly lurched to a halt. That will could occupy his soul, his blood, and even his demonic chi. However, as it spread out through him, attempting to take control, it encountered fierce resistance. That resistance came from the bronze lamp. Furthermore, his body had been remolded by the bronze lamp itself, and was therefore not perfectly suitable for the will of all heaven. Because of that, at this most critical of moments, the will of all heaven suddenly stopped moving. In that moment, the flame of the bronze lamp ignited, causing a majestic glow to spread out and to fight the will of all heaven. The two seemed as incompatible as fire and water. As that happened, the seemingly boundless will of all heaven that existed in heaven and earth tried to force its way into Meng Hao to eradicate the flame of the bronze lamp. It was a critical juncture. Meng Hao coughed up a mouthful of blood, and his eyes shone with red light. In the same moment that the bronze lamp and the will of all heaven began to contend with each other, he extended his right hand and then made a sharp chopping motion at himself. Hexing magic, karmic hexing. Astonishingly, he was using demon-sealing hexing magic to find Chen Fan's karma. Countless karma threads appeared on his head, among which was a pitch-black strand that connected him to Chen Fan. "Sever," he roared, slashing down onto the thread with the battle weapon. Chapter 15:13, 5 Pillars. Without the bronze lamp, Meng Hao's karmic hexing would have been incapable of affecting his memories of Chen Fan, which were the extension of the will of all heaven. But now that the bronze lamp had tied up the will of all heaven, Meng Hao made his move, thus putting an end to the final bit of dangerous power being levied against him. Moments ago, they had been on equal footing, but now that changed as the battle weapon completely destroyed Chen Fan's karma thread. Now, no karma existed at all between Meng Hao and Chen Fan. All of the images of Chen Fan within his memories were forcibly wiped away. The seeds that had been formed by the will of all heaven let out roars of rage as the brilliant light from the bronze lamp swept over them, driving them out. Blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth, and he suddenly seemed much older. Even the slightest mistake moments ago would have resulted in him being wiped out of existence. He thought back to the emissary of all heaven, Song Dayazi, who had stepped outside the vast expanse with a cultivation base half a step into transcendence, and had returned as the emissary of all heaven. He could well imagine Song Dayazi facing a similar situation as he had, and yet, even being half a step into transcendence, he had been unable to avoid the fate which awaited him. Meng Hao knew that without the bronze lamp, he would likely have walked the same path as Song Dayazi. As the will of all heaven was forcibly severed from Meng Hao, heaven and earth began to shake violently, tearing rifts open throughout the starry sky. Amidst the rumbling, the rifts opened up longer and wider, spreading out in all directions. As for Chen Fan, he was there in front of Meng Hao, his body withered up. He looked at Meng Hao and smiled. It was a smile of grief, pain, and release. "Meng Hao, your elder brother let you down." Chen Fan let out a roar, then smashed his hand viciously down onto his own forehead. Meng Hao's face fell and he moved forward to intervene, but Chen Fan was too fast. A boom rang out and Chen Fan exploded. He was killed in body and mind. For the sake of Shanling, he had turned a blind eye to the destruction of the mountain and sea realm. He had chosen to turn on his little junior brother, to cooperate with the will of all heaven to try to erase his mind. In the end, he had even gone so far as to allow the memories in Meng Hao's mind to be infected by the seeds of the will of all heaven. Despite all that he had done, Chen Fan had never been cruel and merciless. Hesitation had always lurked in his heart as guilt. In the end, when it was obvious how things would end, he didn't even have the face to look at Meng Hao. In his bitterness, he chose simply to end his own life. Perhaps his death could be some form of compensation. Meng Hao quietly looked at the spot where Chen Fan had died, heart aching with bitterness. Even though Chen Fan had chosen to attack him, Meng Hao didn't feel any hatred for him. Nowadays, he had fewer friends than ever, and he cherished all of them. Chen Fan's death caused the destruction of the surrounding world to speed up. Soon, ear-splitting rumbling sounds could be heard as everything fell to pieces. When that happened, it was like a veil being lifted away, revealing what was truly outside the vast expanse. Everything was barren. There was no mist-like in the vast expanse, nor were there any signs of life. Everything was in ruins and filled with an aura of death. Wreckage and corpses were strewn about. There was also dust that floated there eternally. Long ago, this truly had been the vast expanse cosmos, with 100 sects and countless cultivators. That was all true. But now, their glory had faded into nothing. It was an enormous place, but even still, it was possible to make out something very far off in the distance. There were 5 pillars which seemed impossibly high, stretching up into the starry sky. This was not Meng Hao's first time seeing the 5 pillars. Back in the underground tunnel in the necropolis, he had seen them via divine sense. This time, though, he was able to see them with his own two eyes. 1. I think I may have mentioned before that this is a contradiction some earlier chapters. I think Urgen changed his mind later about the columns, but have yet to confirm that with him. When I do, I'll adjust past chapters as necessary. However, there was something different about them this time. Back in the fresco, all 5 pillars had stood strong and tall, but now 3 of them had been destroyed. Only 2 of them were whole, as they stretched up into the starry sky. Meng Hao looked at them quietly for a moment, and then his eyes glittered. Because of his bloodline, his demonic qi, and also because of everything that had happened in the mountain and sea realm, he had already guessed much of the truth. A plot which was hatched long, long ago. The all-heaven bloodlines. Apparently they were created for the express purpose of benefiting all heaven. And the demon comes from the immortal. I'm not the first demon. There were many before me, all of them transformed in the moment when they were about to become the immortal, and the demon is what all heaven wants to appear. Perhaps I'm thinking of things in a bit of a one-sided fashion. Perhaps in all of the years in which this starry sky has existed, the true demon has never actually appeared. Perhaps in the critical moment, all heaven stopped them all. Meng Hao couldn't help but think of Song Dayazi. He looked thoughtfully at the enormous pillars, then began to fly in their direction at top speed. Time passed. He wasn't sure how long he had flown, but he kept getting closer and closer. Eventually, he reached the location of one of the destroyed pillars. As he hovered there, he sensed an aura which could shake heaven and earth. It was not the aura of the immortal or the demon, but rather the devil. As soon as he sensed the devil aura, he thought of the devil realm continent. Then, he slowly reached his hand out toward the indescribably large column and gently pushed down onto its surface. Spoiler title equals this part is in spoiler tags because it contains general descriptions of the endings of Renegade Immortal and Beseech the Devil. The descriptions are not very detailed, but I know some readers hate spoilers. Please note that because this is part of the story, it actually does not count as spoiler content for purposes of discussion in the comments on the chapter. If you usually participate in the comments but want to avoid spoilers about this section, I suggest avoiding the comments section for this chapter. The instant his hand made contact, he saw the image of a person who radiated a powerful, deathly aura. He had thrown his head back and was howling. That person was born inside of a sinister, deathly vortex. His body and his soul were separated, and then countless years later he emerged from the vortex, giving rise to a storm that shook the world. In the end, he stepped onto 9 world butterflies, spread his hand, and caused the starry sky to shake. A strange and bizarre aura spread out from him to fill the starry sky, leaving Meng Hao's mind reeling. That energy was enough to cause heaven and earth to dim, heavenly bodies to fall, and the starry sky to bow its head. Meng Hao watched as the person transformed into a landmass, sacrificing himself for everyone he knew. Next, innumerable years passed. Eventually, the man who had transformed into a landmass emerged once again. He left that landmass and traveled outside the vast expanse. His expression was one of pain as he saw the starry sky there transform into a huge hand which grabbed toward him. Light flashed as the young man destroyed one of the hand's fingers. Then, he left the area outside the vast expanse, disappearing far off into the distance. As for the destroyed finger, that was the ruined column which Meng Hao was now in front of. Transcendent cultivator. He was definitely a transcendent cultivator. Meng Hao pulled back his hand, and his eyes shone with a strange light. Based on his judgment, he was sure that the young man he had seen inside the column was a transcendent cultivator from the Devil Realm continent. He wasn't sure of the young man's name, but based on the aura he had sensed, Meng Hao now had a much better understanding of transcendence in general. He flickered into motion, flying toward the next destroyed column. Time passed. Eventually, he reached the second column, whereupon he took a deep breath, reached out, and placed his hand onto its surface. The moment he touched it, his mind filled with rumbling sounds. He saw a young man born in a mountain village. He caused massive chaos on the planet upon which he was born. He killed his way into forging a shocking legend, and slaughtered his way to becoming a paragon in his realm. Later, he walked a difficult path. In order to resurrect his wife, he left carnage in his wake as he fought to the pinnacle. He shook the entire starry sky when he transcended. Almost as soon as Meng Hao laid eyes on the young man, he was shaken. He couldn't help but think of Slaughter, and of the time-walking technique Slaughter had taught him. The young man in the column, and Slaughter, both looked exactly like the statue on the immortal god continent. His expression was cold as he looked up into the starry sky. The wave of his hand caused the heavenly bodies to shift and the starry sky to be torn open. He stepped outside of the vast expanse and also destroyed one of the fingers before disappearing into the distance. Spoiler. Meng Hao was left panting. When he pulled his hand away, he looked at the destroyed column with a complicated expression. After a long moment, he turned and headed toward the next column. This column was not destroyed. It was one of the two that stretched high up into the starry sky. When he reached out to touch it, he saw nothing inside except for emptiness. There was no transcendent cultivator, but there was shocking immortal qi, which was apparently brewing inside of the column. Just visible within the immortal qi were countless images, all of which seemed to depict people. Those people were all cultivating the magic of immortality, and were on the path to becoming the immortal. There has never been a transcendent immortal, Meng Hao murmured. After examining it further, he realized that the column was weak, almost to the point of collapse. If the true immortal ever appeared, it was likely that the column would immediately be destroyed. Meng Hao pulled his hand away. After some more thought, he began to fly toward the fourth column, which was the final destroyed column. Time went by. After passing through all of the dust and ruins to arrive at the fourth column, he took a deep breath, reached out and touched it. Rumbling filled his mind and he caught sight of a young man. He wore a robe decorated in flowers and seemed different than the two other young men Meng Hao had just seen. A sarcastic smile could be seen on his face, and his eyes glittered with intelligence. His features were delicate and even pretty, and he almost looked as if he were recovering from an illness. Meng Hao watched the young man silently. He didn't know who he was, but as he looked on, the young man created the copper mirror. He also held a bronze lamp in his hand. Furthermore, the robe he was wearing was the same robe Meng Hao had seen being worn by the person who had faced the immortal tribulation and been killed by the finger from the heavens. Meng Hao instantly realized who this was. Patriarch Vast Expanse. Eventually, Meng Hao watched as Patriarch Vast Expanse also went outside the vast expanse. He destroyed another of the fingers and then disappeared into the void. Eventually, Meng Hao pulled his hand back. After a moment of thought, he proceeded toward the last of the pillars, one of the two which were still erect. As he flew closer and closer, a powerful demonic qi from the column began to form a resonance with him. Chapter 15:14. 1. This chapter is untitled in the original Chinese. The instant that resonance formed with the demonic qi, Meng Hao's eyes began to shine with a deep, profound light. He had already surmised that of the 5 pillars, there was one for the ghost, god, immortal, devil, and finally, the demon. He increased his speed and eventually arrived at the final staggeringly large pillar which stretched up into the starry sky. After a moment of thought, he reached out and touched the pillar. Then he frowned. Eventually, he pulled his hand away and his eyes flashed. The other pillars don't seem to have much to do with me, but this pillar represents the demon. There is a resonance with me, and yet, when I touch it, no strange transformations occur. He wasn't quite sure what that meant, but he could tell that the resonance was growing stronger. Gradually, a sensation of deadly crisis began to build up within him. Eyes flickering, he spun. Instead of spending any more time in contact with the final pillar, he decided to leave. He was soon 30 meters away, then 300. The pillar still stood in place, and the farther away he went, the weaker the resonance became. He didn't seem to be reacting much to that, but inwardly he was focused on examining himself. When he reached the 3,000-meter mark, he hesitated a bit. It wasn't that he wasn't curious about the column. Rather, he had to forcibly resist the urge to rush back and touch it. He definitely needed to come to a deeper understanding of what dangers lurked in this area. After the 3,000-meter mark, his eyes flickered, and he pushed himself faster. When he was several thousand meters away, he increased his speed yet again. Even when he was 30,000 meters away, nothing had happened. Finally, he stopped in thought for a moment, then gritted his teeth and headed back toward the pillar. Moments later, he arrived, then reached out to touch it. Rumbling filled his mind, and as his demonic qi blended with the aura of the pillar, the resonance exploded in intensity, and he suddenly realized that there was an illusory world within the pillar. It was like the mist of the vast expanse, boundless and majestic. At first, there didn't seem to be anything other than mist, but soon, Meng Hao realized that within the very center of the world was a bright red thread. It was a thread that looked like a blood vessel, except it was huge. Soon, he realized that the thread twisted and turned around on itself, forming a shape, the shape of a person. There were 4 limbs visible, as well as a head. Apparently, that thread really was a blood vessel, and it really was forming into the shape of a person. There was no flesh or blood and no bones, just a system of blood vessels. Shockingly, there appeared to be fruits growing from the blood vessels. In total, there were 98 of them. Some were large and some were small, and they were located throughout the shape which the blood vessels formed. All of them were withered, as though their life and quintessence had been absorbed, and they were what had enabled the shape of the person to take form. Upon closer examination, it was clear that the various fruits had faces on them, all of whom had their eyes closed, and were completely motionless. As Meng Hao examined all of this, his heart began to pound. Eventually, his eyes fell upon the 98th fruit and the 98th face. Shockingly, that face was the same face which had attempted to interfere with Meng Hao summoning the copper mirror, the emissary of all heaven. It was Song Daozi. These faces. Meng Hao gasped as an idea suddenly struck him, a vast, monumental idea that left his mind completely spinning. These faces are all of the people who were turned from immortal to demon. From ancient times until now, there have been many people like Song Daozi, all of whom were turned into the demon. No, that's not right. The true demon hasn't appeared yet, otherwise this pillar would look very different. These people all became food for this person-shaped outline in the moment that they were about to transform into the true demon. Meng Hao's mind reeled at the sight of all the faces on the fruit and the human-shaped network of blood vessels. Suddenly, he was struck with the realization that the shape wasn't complete. It lacked a final fruit. That empty location was where the heart should be. With a fruit there, the outline of this person would be complete and perfect. Almost as soon as his eyes fell upon the empty location of the heart, all of the 98 faces' eyes suddenly opened, and they looked at Meng Hao. His mind was left reeling, his scalp tingling. The 98 faces staring at him caused him to recall how there had been 98 sons of all heaven. Even as he began to pull back his divine sense, the 98 faces all smiled. They were sinister smiles, mysterious to the extreme, and the instant they appeared, the faces spoke. "You're the missing piece. Don't go, don't go." The bizarre voices filled the world, and Meng Hao's mind spun. His demonic chi suddenly seemed to be on the verge of erupting. Almost simultaneously, the faces began to transform one by one into beams of light which shot toward him. There was no time for Meng Hao to do anything other than sever his divine sense. Outside of the pillar, he quickly pulled his hand away and backed up. In almost that same instant, the pillar began to shake, and 98 faces suddenly shot out from it into the starry sky outside the vast expanse. Without pausing for a moment, they began to speed in Meng Hao's direction. As they neared, Meng Hao's hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture, and he unleashed a divine ability. Numerous mountains descended to block the path of the faces, and yet the bizarre faces simply passed directly through the mountains as they closed in on Meng Hao. Meng Hao's face fell and he punched out with his right hand. The devil-butchering fist created a massive tempest, and yet the faces completely disregarded it and were soon almost right in front of him. Apparently, no matter what techniques he unleashed upon them, it could do nothing to stop them. His eyes flashed with killing intent, and he let out a cold harumph. Suddenly, the copper mirror armor appeared, and he slashed out with the battle weapon. It split open the void, creating a vast rift which separated him from the faces. This time, it seemed much harder for the faces to keep going, and over 10 of them were actually split in half from the effort. And yet, they didn't dissipate but kept speeding toward him. Meng Hao was continuously falling back, his face grim. No matter what ideas he came up with to deal with the situation, none of them worked. He sent out his demonic chi, only to watch as the faces devoured it. Apparently, it was like fuel for them. Meng Hao's face flickered as he pressed on, followed by the swarm of faces. They quickly caught up to him and began to surround him, blocking his path. Then they smiled oddly and lunged toward him with gaping jaws. They bit into his flesh, apparently intent on chewing into his body and consuming him. "Screw off," Meng Hao said, eyes flashing coldly. His cultivation base erupted and the battle weapon flashed as he swung it. A blast of wind swept out in all directions, and yet it didn't seem to affect the faces at all. Blue veins popped out on Meng Hao's face, and he gritted his teeth violently. It was at this point that the bronze lamp sent blazing light out in all directions, and the faces began to tremble. Screaming, they fell back. Meng Hao finally took a deep breath and used the opportunity to flee. However, almost as soon as he broke free from the faces, they pounced on him again. The light of the bronze lamp still caused them to scream, and yet they didn't give up. They endured the pain and tried again to chew into Meng Hao's flesh. The intense light from the bronze lamp caused them to tremble on the verge of melting, and yet Meng Hao's aura was something they desired, something that was like food for them. Demonic qi. Meng Hao's own demonic qi was absorbed by the faces, nourishing them, giving them strength to fight the light of the bronze lamp. Pain racked Meng Hao inside and out, and his eyes were completely bloodshot. Having been sent outside the vast expanse by Han Bei, he managed to unveil many secrets and dispel many doubts. And yet, he had been placed in incredible, deadly danger. Whether it was the illusion of which Chen Fan had been a part of, or the personal arrival of the will of all heaven, or these faces, they were all situations in which the slightest mistake would lead to eternal doom. He could well imagine what had occurred to the 98 cultivators like Song Daozi, whom these faces represented. They were people who had reached a point very similar to this, and none of them had been able to escape. All had perished in the end, becoming components of the person-shaped outline that he had just seen. As for Meng Hao, he had dispelled the illusion and cast out the will of all heaven. And yet, he was not quite strong enough to deal with the faces, no matter how much he wanted to. His eyes were crimson, and he simply couldn't give in to the idea of being defeated. His clone was almost finished with his work, meaning that the 9th hex was close to completion. He was unprecedentedly close to transcendence. Just when everything was almost complete, this sudden turn of events occurred. Suddenly, deep hatred for Han Bei rose up within his heart. Rumbling could be heard as the faces continued to chew into his body, to devour his life force, his demonic qi, his soul, his everything. It took only a moment for him to become extremely withered. It was as if his fate were unavoidable, and yet he refused to believe that. He lifted his right hand and prepared to call upon his final trump card, a divine ability that he wouldn't use unless there were absolutely, positively no other options left. The price to be paid to use it would be unimaginably high. But then suddenly, a piercing cry rang out from within his armor. All of a sudden, the parrot flew out. How quickly the tide had turned. Chapter 15:15. Call me Lord Fifth, bitches. The parrot's eyes were bright red as it hovered there by Meng Hao. Back when they were first reunited, its memories had been in chaos. However, despite being unable to see things clearly, it knew that Meng Hao was very important and had thus chosen to return to him. It saw everything that happened after that, the result being that the shattered memories in its head seemed to increase constantly. It was as if there were a tiny node inside of its mind, a node which contained the image of Meng Hao. After Meng Hao appeared in the flesh, that node burst open, allowing the parrot's erased mind to appear once again. Eventually, in this moment of deep crisis, its erased memories were fully fused together and erupted with great power. Are you Billy? Memories exploded out into the parrot's mind. It saw itself meeting Meng Hao for the first time, saw itself facing danger with him in numerous adventures. Everything began to awaken. Back when its mind had been erased, it had managed to bury that node deep inside of itself, and it was that which eventually gave it the chance to recover. The parrot was crafty, and although things had ended tragically back then, and it had been filled with grief, it had still managed to devise a backup plan. Lord Fifth, the parrot roared. Call me Lord Fifth, bitches. It remembered. It remembered everything. It looked over at Meng Hao being devoured by the faces and suddenly let out a powerful squawk. Meng Hao's armor shattered, creating countless black sparks that, under the parrot's control, swirled around him, moving faster and faster until they formed a vortex. The power of the vortex created numerous streams of gravitational force. However, that force didn't affect the world in general, just the faces latched onto Meng Hao. Gradually, they were dragged away from Meng Hao, whose expression brightened. At the same time, the glow of the bronze lamp grew even more intense. The faces let out blood-curdling screams that they were ripped off of him. Then they were sucked into the vortex, where they shattered into pieces. That didn't kill them, though. It just created countless other, tinier faces. More and more of them appeared. There weren't just dozens now, but hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands. Meng Hao was panting, and his body was dangerously withered. However, now that the faces were no longer consuming him, his battle prowess and cultivation base began to recover quickly. At the same time, he unleashed his own power, causing the vortex to spin even more quickly. Soon it was a raging tempest, whereupon the parrot let out another squawk, sending it shooting off into the distance. Fudge, it shrieked. How dare you try to fight Lord Fifth? You might not have any fur or feathers, but Lord Fifth is going to go all out to put you down. Meng Hao looked over at the parrot, his eyes shining with excitement. The fact that the parrot had recovered its memories was a momentous thing. Now, parrot and man both unleashed incredible speed to get as far away from the vortex as possible. However, the tens of thousands of broken and shattered faces immediately gave chase. Apparently sensing that they wouldn't be able to catch up, the faces then merged together into one huge swath of skin. The skin had no bones, no muscle, and no blood. It was simply a patch of human-shaped skin that whistled through the starry sky toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao and the parrot fled, and the skin chased them from behind. The parrot let out a mighty squawk, as if it were going to hold nothing back. What do we do, Meng Hao? Damn it. Lord Fifth's memories were just restored only to be pulled into this situation. What do we do? What do we do? We're outside of the vast expanse now. If we delay, the will of all heaven will fully awaken, and then we'll be dead for sure. Only a bit of his will is awake now. We have to get back into the vast expanse. The will of all heaven won't be able to directly affect us in there. Meng Hao, can you create a distraction? Give me the time it takes an incense stick to burn, and I can sacrifice some of the essence power of the copper mirror to set up a teleportation portal. That will be able to get us back into the starry sky of the vast expanse. Despite the incredible speed with which the parrot and Meng Hao were moving, the patch of skin was moving even faster and was closing in rapidly. Meng Hao's eyes glittered. They were in a deadly trap, a trap set up to target him, and as such, his eyes flickered with killing intent. The time it takes an incense stick to burn. I think I can do that. After a moment of thought, he gritted his teeth. If the parrot hadn't recovered its memories and taken the initiative to help, he would already have resorted to that one certain magic. It was his trump card, a magical technique that was not yet complete and might even spawn some unexpected side effects. As for whether such transformations would be beneficial or detrimental, it was impossible to tell. At the moment, though, there were no other options. Meng Hao's eyes glittered coldly as he suddenly spun in place and waved his hand. "Start setting up the spell formation," he growled. He and the parrot had worked together for so long that there was no need for deliberation. Instantly, black threads shot out from the parrot and began to spin in place behind Meng Hao in the form of a teleportation portal. Meng Hao took a deep breath. His eyes shone with a brilliant light as he extended his finger out into the starry sky and murmured, "Ninth hex." What he was about to unleash was none other than the ninth hex. His clone had already completed 8 of the sealing marks that would make the final version. Because the final mark wasn't complete, if Meng Hao unleashed the ninth hex, it could have some unknown effect on his clone. He wasn't sure what exactly would happen, but now was not the time to contemplate misgivings. He performed an incantation gesture with his left hand, and then shoved his hand out. First sealing mark. Rumbling sounds filled heaven and earth, and everything shook. The starry sky vibrated as an indescribable power began to converge in front of Meng Hao. As soon as the sealing mark appeared, the patch of skin suddenly lurched to a halt, and a strange gleam appeared deep in its eyes. Next, Meng Hao performed another incantation gesture, causing the second sealing mark to appear. It merged with the first sealing mark, causing the energy to rocket even higher, reaching a level 10 times higher than before. Then came the third sealing mark, and the fourth. One by one, they all appeared and merged together, and the terrifying energy reached an unbelievable level, causing everything in the starry sky to shake violently. Next were the 5th, 6th, and 7th sealing marks. A level of power appeared that the vast expanse shrine had been unable to withstand, a power that would cause even peak 9 essences cultivators to tremble. With 7 sealing marks, it already seemed possible to seal the heavens. The patch of skin seemed shocked. For the first time, it began to back up instead of chase. However, it was in that very moment that the light in Meng Hao's eyes shone, and he threw his arms up. The 7 sealing marks formed a dazzling magical symbol that began to speed forward, emanating a will that could seal the heavens. The light that shone out from it was majestic to the extreme, a light that seemed capable of sealing anything and everything, that could cause everything bright to grow dark, that could cause all living beings to bow their heads. Rumbling echoed out as the sea of light swept through the starry sky toward the patch of skin. "What is that?" Countless howls began to echo out from within the skin. However, no matter how it tried to evade, there was no avoiding the light which slammed into the skin. Behind Meng Hao, the parrot gaped in shock at what was happening. Meng Hao shivered, and blood sprayed out of his mouth. Using the incomplete 9th hex in this way could be done only by paying a great cost. Roaring sounds spread out in all directions, and at the same time, blood-curdling screams echoed out from the skin as it was shredded to pieces by the light. Numerous bedraggled faces appeared, which immediately began to fly back toward the column they had come from. Meng Hao's face was pale and he was swaying back and forth. The parrot immediately gushed, all right, I'm almost ready. We can teleport out in just a moment." Meng Hao looked up and in the iciest of voices said, "How could I flee?" He took a step forward and his cultivation base surged with power. "How could I run?" With that, he transformed into a beam of light which shot at incredible speed toward the pillar that the faces were fleeing to. Ever since that bitch Hanbei sent me here, this place has tried to kill me over and over again. First was the illusion with elder brother Chen Fan, then the will of all heaven trying to possess me. Then these 5 pillars showed up, and the demonic chief faces tried to eat me. After all that, how could I flee? How could I run? Roaring, he shoved his arms out in front of him, causing boundless light to surge up. I've been forced into unleashing my incomplete 9th hex. Well then, I'm definitely not going to waste the opportunity. In the past, there was the underworld ghost, the white-haired cultivator of the immortal gods, and the transcendent expert from the devil realm. They destroyed 3 columns, and although I might not be ready to do the same thing, I might as well do a dry run. Rumbling echoed out as Meng Hao shoved the light of the combined sealing marks directly toward the column of demonic chi. As he flew along, the starry sky shattered and the faces screamed. The light picked up speed, and as it neared the column, killing intent flickered in Meng Hao's eyes. Then, he performing an incantation gesture and roared, 8 sealing marks. With that, the 8th sealing mark appeared, glittering brightly. As it merged into the brightness and fused with the other 7 sealing marks, the light began to shine a bright violet color. The violet light caused the starry sky to go quiet. Everything began to vibrate in complete helplessness. The faces faded away, screaming, as the light slashed into the pillar representing the demon. The sky shattered, and everything was thrown into chaos as the demon pillar shuddered. Meanwhile, back in the starry sky of all heaven, on planet Vast Expanse, on the first continent, in one of the cities of the mortal world, the 9th reincarnation of Meng Hao's clone, Little Treasure, suddenly coughed up a huge mouthful of blood. Then he teetered in place for a moment before collapsing onto the ground. The entire household was thrown into chaos. He began to shiver and spasm, as numerous sealing marks began to shine brightly on his forehead. Chapter 15-16, The Return. The fight continued outside the Vast Expanse. The light formed from the 8 sealing marks of Meng Hao's 9th hex was so powerful that it surpassed the 9 essences level. Meng Hao wasn't sure how far away it was from the transcendent level, but he was sure that not a single 9 essences cultivator would be able to survive an encounter with it. Ear-splitting rumbling sounds spread out in all directions. The faces weren't even able to get back into the column before they were incinerated. Before dying, they let out miserable screams, which faded away almost before they even began. Just before dissipating, their expressions seemed to be those of release and gratitude. Soon, everything was quiet and still. It happened faster than either Meng Hao or the parrot could ever have imagined. The parrot looked over at the demon pillar, which was still trembling, and Meng Hao, who was radiating an air of madness. The parrot couldn't help but take a deep breath as it gaped at Meng Hao. After all the years that they had been separated, it turned out that Meng Hao was still the type to seek revenge over the smallest grievance. What is he planning to do? The parrot thought, eyes wide with disbelief. How vicious. That pillar can only be destroyed by a transcendent cultivator. He wants to try to destroy the demon pillar now. The parrot looked around at the destruction and chaos in the starry sky, then back at the pillar. A moment later, after the light faded away, a cracking sound rang out. At the same time, it was possible to see that a crevice had appeared on the pillar. Although the pillar wasn't crushed, the crevice which had opened up could obviously not be mended. The parrot shivered and then yelled, "Meng Hao, that's enough. Really, enough is enough. The spell formation is ready. We need to get out of here as soon as possible." The parrot then turned toward the completed spell formation, which began to rumble to life. Meng Hao immediately began to back up. Although the battle had been bitter, he had won a stunning victory. I can't destroy this pillar now, he thought, eyes glittering coldly. But one of these days I'll come back here and wipe it out of existence. In almost the same moment that the crack had appeared, the person-shaped outline inside of the pillar had begun to shrink. The fruits on it exploded and soon, a piercing shriek rang out. The shriek passed out of the column into the world beyond, echoing out in all directions. Blood sprayed out of Meng Hao's mouth as he heard the sound of the cry. Without the slightest hesitation, he increased his speed. Simultaneously, the pillar that represented the immortal began to shrink and wither. That in turn caused the pillar of demonic chi to begin to recover. And yet the crevice which had appeared remained. Shockingly, it was at this point that the will of the vast expanse rose up, causing the starry sky to shake. Then, a huge eye abruptly appeared up ahead. It was enormous and completely bloodshot. It was a mass of chaos and seemed to contain the seething mist of the vast expanse. This eye was apparently the will of all heaven, the final gambit to be played in this day's events. As soon as it appeared, everything went completely still and quiet. The opening of the eye caused Meng Hao to be filled with a sense of intense crisis. He could tell that the natural laws in the area were being destroyed, and as the eye gazed upon him, he felt a terrifying aura that caused his scalp to go numb. Immediately, the bronze lamp began to shine brighter than ever, transforming Meng Hao into a figure of light. Almost in the same moment that the eye opened, Meng Hao reached the spell formation put together by the parrot. The parrot howled as the spell formation began to activate. However, even as the light was still beginning to shine, the seemingly eternal eye caused the starry sky around it to twist and distort as a huge mouth appeared. Then, the mouth lunged toward Meng Hao and the parrot as if to consume them. The parrot's eyes were bright red, and it howled again. Cracking sounds could be heard, which came from the cracks spreading out over the copper mirror. By damaging the mirror, it was possible to negate the effects of the changed natural law caused by the will of all heaven. A moment later, rumbling sounds echoed out as the parrot and Meng Hao vanished. That was when the mouth arrived. It took a huge bite, causing the starry sky to shake, and leaving a gigantic, smoking crater in the spot where the teleportation portal had been. The eye glared off into the distance, and a piercing shriek was just barely audible from the direction of the demonic chi pillar. As that happened, the brilliant light of teleportation appeared in a dusty corner of the starry sky of all heaven. A moment later, Meng Hao and the parrot appeared. Meng Hao immediately coughed up some blood, and the parrot listed weakly. The light of teleportation faded away, and the copper mirror appeared, covered with cracks. Although it wasn't destroyed, it was clearly in worse condition than before the trip outside the vast expanse. "Damn it," the parrot said, looking very irritated. "Lord Fifth just woke up and was immediately thrown into grave danger. I quit, you hear. Meng Hao, you'd better give Lord Fifth a good explanation for all of this." Meng Hao responded with a question. "Was that I, all heaven? Is all heaven the will of the starry sky of the vast expanse?" Fear could be seen in the parrot's eyes as it began to speak. Let's say that the world essence of the starry sky of the vast expanse has a will who is called all heaven. The main body of the will exists outside the vast expanse, and yet that will can also fill the vast expanse itself. In the beginning, that will blessed all living things and supposedly even taught all living beings how to practice cultivation. But as time went on, it began to weaken and then go mad. However, I have a vague memory deep inside that seems to indicate that this all heaven actually has a different origin. What exactly that is, nobody knows. Even I'm not sure. Damn it, how could I not know? The parrot shook its head in confusion. A thoughtful look could be seen in Meng Hao's eye as he stared at the parrot and asked another question. "Were you created by Patriarch Vast Expanse?" "Patriarch Vast Expanse," the parrot murmured, its eyes gleaming with reminiscence. After awakening, its memories had slowly been revealed. After a long moment it nodded but then suddenly seemed to hesitate. Apparently, Patriarch Vast Expanse had created the copper mirror but not the parrot. Apparently, the parrot came from a time before Patriarch Vast Expanse was even alive. The parrot didn't want to think about the past and as such began to yell at Meng Hao. "Forget about it. Meng Hao, you owe me an explanation. Damn it, Lord Fifth's memories were just restored, and then I got scared nearly to death." Meng Hao's eyes flickered with killing intent as he looked off in the direction of planet Vast Expanse. "I'm going to go get an explanation, for you and me both." It was just as he said. The next thing he was planning to do was to go get an explanation. From what he could tell, the will of all heaven could only affect him directly if he was outside of the vast expanse. Apparently, it couldn't do anything within the vast expanse itself, which meant that Meng Hao was temporarily safe. The parrot's explanation had confirmed his suspicions. Meng Hao turned, killing intent flickering in his eyes as he made his way off into the distance. The parrot immediately began to follow. "Hey," it asked, "where'd the meat jelly get off to, that old fart?" Its words were met by silence on Meng Hao's part. The parrot suddenly shivered. What happened?" Sadness filled Meng Hao's face as he opened his bag of holding and carefully pulled out the shattered remnants of the meat jelly armor. The parrot stared in shock for a long time before letting out a cry of anguish. The moment of silence which followed seemed to last an eternity. Eventually, the parrot turned to Meng Hao, and its eyes were completely bloodshot. Meng Hao, I'm going to ask one thing and you're going to answer me. When do we go slaughter them? Soon, Meng Hao murmured in reply, his eyes equally as red. We'll slaughter the 33 heavens, we'll slaughter the immortal god continent, and we'll slaughter the devil realm continent. Then, we'll go outside the vast expanse and slaughter the will of all heaven. Soon, with that, he transformed into a beam of light that shot like lightning through the starry sky. As he flew along, he rotated his cultivation base, but his withered body wasn't recovering very quickly. He looked incredibly gaunt and thus incredibly fierce. His eyes flickered with red light, making him look almost like he had just climbed up out of the grave. Shocking rumbles echoed out in heaven and earth as he flew toward planet vast expanse with deadly intent. It only took a few months of travel. After all, he hadn't been very far from planet vast expanse to begin with. Soon, he was looking at the planet from some distance away. As he neared, the planet's protective shield sprang up as if to block him. Meng Hao didn't even look at it. He passed directly through it, whereupon a somber, dignified voice echoed out. Respectful greetings, Ninth Paragon, welcome back. Even as the voice rang out, Meng Hao entered the atmosphere of planet vast expanse. As soon as he did, the other paragons could sense his presence, and the intensely murderous aura caused them all to look up. Jin Yunqian, the sect leader, and all the others had returned from the necropolis. They still hadn't successfully made it to the ninth land mass. After their successive failures, they had been sitting cross-legged in meditation, but now looks of shock could be seen on their faces. Chapter 15-17, Hunting Down Hanbei. Jin Yunqian was shaking more than anyone. Once he realized who that killing intent belonged to, he subconsciously reached down and rubbed his bracelet of holding, whereupon he felt a bit better. It's the ninth paragon. This aura, how could he have become so strong? He's been missing for hundreds of years. I can't believe he's finally back. Faces flickered as Meng Hao hovered there in the air above planet vast expanse for a moment before speeding toward the first continent. In the Holy Daughter Palace on the first continent, vast expanse Holy Daughter Hanbei was seated cross-legged in meditation. Her face was pale and she looked exhausted. Suddenly, she sensed the aura emanating from above, and a smile broke out on her face. But that smile quickly froze, and she shot to her feet, a look of disbelief and shock on her face. I can't believe he woke up. This is impossible. Trembling, Hanbei began to back up. Suddenly, the glow of teleportation sprang up around her and she vanished. A moment later, an indescribable pressure descended and slammed into the Holy Daughter Palace. The entire palace was instantly incinerated, wiped away. In its place was a huge crater, above which Meng Hao hovered, eyes flashing with killing intent as he looked off into the distance. You can't escape, he said through gritted teeth. You will die this day. I won't rest until that happens. Outside of the vast expanse, he had brushed far too closely with death, causing his hatred for Hanbei to seep into his very bones. He had vowed to slay her, and as far as Chu Yuyan was concerned, he was prepared for how to deal with that situation. His eyes flashed like lightning, and then a massive boom echoed out as the air was ripped apart. Meng Hao's vicious, murderous aura spread out to cover the entire planet, joined by his divine sense. All living beings on the planet, including mortals and cultivators, even the 9 essences experts, were left trembling. It was as if some great disaster had suddenly come to loom over their heads. What happened? Jin Yunqian gasped. He could sense the raging, murderous aura coming off of Meng Hao, and it was obvious that it was exponentially more powerful than the last time the two of them had tangled. Jin Yunqian, just like the sect leader and the others, had made progress in recent years thanks to the multiple forays into the necropolis. The entire group had experienced increases in their cultivation bases. By this point, Jin Yunqian believed himself to be at the utter peak of the 9 essences level. And yet, now that he sensed Meng Hao's energy, his face fell, and he had to admit that as of this moment, Meng Hao's aura was completely and utterly terrifying. Why is he trying to kill a disciple from the first sect? Although Hanbei was a holy daughter of the vast expanse school, in comparison to a 9 essences expert, she was nothing more than a disciple. That's not any ordinary disciple. Whoever it was managed to escape before he landed his blow on the first sect. Jin Yunqian's eyes flickered as he emerged out in the open. He wasn't going to interfere with Meng Hao. He merely wanted to see exactly what was happening. It wasn't just him. Sha Jiudong emerged from a sandstorm that raged in planet vast expanse's huge desert, looking extremely frightened. He took a deep breath, and his eyes flashed because of the uneasy feeling he was experiencing. He could tell that something bad was about to happen, and immediately sped off to observe. Immortal Bai Wuchen hesitated for a moment. At the moment, she didn't dare to show herself to Meng Hao, not in his current state, so she simply sat there quietly, pretending that she hadn't noticed his aura. She was the only one who didn't show herself. The sect leader and the other 9 essences paragons were all flying through the air of planet vast expanse to see what was happening. Their hearts were pounding from the sheer awe-inspiring nature of Meng Hao's aura, which left them completely shaken. That was especially true of the sect leader, whose cultivation base was so high that he had assumed he must be at the absolute pinnacle. He was even sure that he would prevail against the combined forces of Jin Yunqian and the other 9 essences paragons. But as of this moment, Meng Hao's aura left him terrified. The intense level of pressure was almost impossible to accept. How did he become so powerful? The sect leader thought. It's understandable that our cultivation bases rose thanks to the altars in the necropolis. But he simply vanished for a few hundred years, and now that he's back, he's suddenly unimaginably stronger. The sect leader's eyes flickered, and he pushed forward with greater speed. After all, disciple Hanbei of the first sect was actually his apprentice. He had accepted her as his only apprentice, and now Meng Hao was trying to chase her down and kill her. Clearly, there were secrets at play. As everyone was speeding toward the first continent, Meng Hao suddenly appeared in a different location, a place where the aura of teleportation was strong. This was none other than the location Hanbei had teleported to. It was a small-scale sect that was not directly subordinate to the vast expanse school. As soon as Meng Hao appeared, everything was thrown into a commotion. The sect itself was built upon 9 different mountains, all of which began to shine with bright light. Clearly, it was a spell formation. In addition to that, a moment later, 9 blasts of sword chi to suddenly shoot out toward Meng Hao. The lands in the area shook as the 9 mountains themselves then rose up into the air. There were also hosts of cultivators, whose eyes shone red, and who didn't even seem in control of their own minds as they charged madly toward Meng Hao. Hanbei had been on planet Vast Expanse for many years, and had always been on guard against Meng Hao. Although she had grown a bit lax recently, her preparations were all still in place. This was one of the locations she had set aside especially to deal with Meng Hao. "Kill him," roared the tens of thousands of cultivators. In combination with the spell formation, the 9 mountains, and the 9 beams of sword chi, they shot aggressively toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao's eyes flashed, and his killing intent surged stronger than ever. Since these people were trying to stop him, that meant they were allied with Hanbei and thus were his enemies. "Die," he said impatiently, shoving his hand out violently. Everything went dim, and a gale-force wind blew as a huge hand materialized. The hand slammed into the 9 streams of sword chi, which were powerful enough to cause problems for an ordinary 9 essences cultivator for at least a short time. But when they slammed into the magical hand sent out by Meng Hao, they shattered instantly. They weren't even powerful enough to stand up to a single blow. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the sword chi was destroyed. Next, the hand slammed into the mountains. The mountains shook as cracks spread out across them. Then, they exploded into countless fragments. The entire matter happened almost in the blink of an eye. The hand didn't seem to have been slowed down in the slightest. It smashed into the cultivators and the spell formation, causing a deafening boom to spread out. A huge handprint was smashed into the ground, surrounded by cracks which snaked out in every direction. The spell formation was completely destroyed, and the cultivators who had been charging an attack were reduced to a bloody pulp. Everything went quiet. If Meng Hao had been an ordinary 9 essences cultivator, this little trap might not have resulted in his death, but would have at least delayed him a bit. And what Hanbei needed right now was time. However, to the current Meng Hao, destroying this place was as easy as taking a breath. His eyes flickered as he waved his hand through the air to locate Hanbei's aura. After some examination, he snorted coldly, then sent his divine sense out in all directions. However, he could find no trace of Hanbei. "Parrot," he said anxiously. The parrot flew out from his bag of holding, radiating dazzling light, its eyes shining brightly. Meng Hao sent his divine sense out again, and this time, the parrot let out a squawk as it bolstered his divine sense. Everything began to tremble violently. "Rumble." A huge wind whipped up, with Meng Hao in the middle of it all. As his divine sense surged out exponentially, it filled planet Vast Expanse, until finally he caught sight of Han Bei in another small-scale sect. As soon as he locked down onto her position, he stepped forward, ripping the air apart and stepping through the rift. It took only a moment for him to appear in the exact location he had just identified. The instant he appeared, Han Bei was stepping onto a teleportation portal in the sect. She suddenly looked around to find Meng Hao speeding through the air toward her. Her face went pale and she suddenly slapped down at the spell formation with her hand. A boom echoed out as the spell formation began to activate. At the same time, she declined to wait for Meng Hao to destroy the preparations she had made in the sect. She destroyed the entire sect herself, then borrowed that power to fuel the teleportation formation. Radiant light glittered, surrounding her. She began to fade away, as if she would be teleported away at any moment. But how could Meng Hao let that happen? He extended his right hand and pointed his finger directly at Han Bei. Eighth Hex,